And today for me is like the Super Bowl of Mormon podcasting, Mormon Stories podcasting. I was joking with my two guests today that other than like Donnie Marie Osmond, the late Paul Dunn, Stephen Barb Young, maybe Dan Reynolds, one of the apostles. These are two dudes that I am just so super excited to have on Mormon Stories podcast. I present to you today Jared Hess and Tyler Measom.
The Donnie and Marie of Mormon film. I'm a little bit country. And you're a little bit rock and roll.
These dudes are super cool in their own right. Tyler will be no stranger to you who have been Mormon Stories fans for years. Tyler's the director of Sons of Perdition, a documentary about the Lost Boys of the FLDS Church. He is the director, writer, whatever, producer of An Honest Liar about the amazing Randy, who really recently passed away this year. He did an amazing doc on MTV, which we did a little screening for pre-COVID, which was fun. And of course, he is the co-director of the amazing Murder Among the Mormons. So Tyler Measom, welcome back to Mormon Stories podcast.
Thanks, John. This is my third go-around. So by this time, maybe I'll have the right answers for you.
That's great to have you. It's an honor. And I've been kind of cyber buds and occasionally hanging out with Jared Hess. Jared Hess is probably most known worldwide. He broke onto the scene as the writer, producer, director, etc. of Napoleon Dynamite, along with his amazing partner, Jerusha Hess. But he's directed many cool films in Hollywood, probably too many to mention, but Don Verdeen, the one with Jack Black, Nacho Libre. And he's doing amazing things on HBO and with Netflix, but he is the co-director of this amazing, groundbreaking global phenomenon that is Murder Among the Mormons, which is a documentary about Mark Hofmann, bomber and forger Mark Hofmann. Jared Hess.
John DeLynn, it's an honor to be here. Especially, he doesn't tell people that he shoots in an alley. There's like bricks behind us. We're in the streets.
It's true.
This is hard.
These are real bricks. These are real bricks, just like the Salamander letter was a real letter. So, all right. So I'm just thrilled to have you guys here. We've spent hours with Tyler hearing his story. So Tyler, if you don't mind, I just want to take a couple minutes. And Jared, can we begin by just having you tell the audience a little bit, whatever you want to tell about your Mormon story? It's not the focus today.
Oh my gosh.
But what do you want to tell about your Mormon story just to begin?
Golly, my Mormon story. Oh geez, I better turn off my phone.
That's good. It makes it real. We're keeping it real here.
That was a text from Satan. He's trying to interrupt the conversation. So I was, I come from a long line of hearty pioneer stock. Love my, Mormon ancestry and heritage and all that good stuff. My mom and dad were both raised in the church, have incredible grandparents. My dad at age, in his early 30s was the bishop of the Hyde Park ward in London where we lived growing up. He passed away shortly thereafter, and then my mom remarried my stepdad, amazing man who just passed away last year. But raised in the church, I served a mission in Venezuela. I got hernias, had to go home. Then I was reassigned to Chicago. So I was a year in Venezuela, a year in Chicago, Spanish speaking. Had an amazing experience, incredible mission presidents. Loved it all. Met my wife, Jerusha, at BYU. The guy that plays Kip in Napoleon Dynamite, Aaron Rule, I introduced him to his amazing spouse, Yuka Rule, and they introduced me to Jerusha when I got home from my mission. So they returned the fave. And then Jerusha and I studied film at BYU. We wrote Napoleon Dynamite, and then with a bunch of our fellow film students went up to Idaho for a month and shot it. And then I got into Sundance and blah, 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 blah. And just kind of launched everybody's career that worked on it. We have 2 biological kids together. That sounds weird. And then 2 adopted. We have a daughter that is African American that we adopted here in the United States. And then we have a son with Down syndrome that we adopted from Bulgaria. So we have this incredibly fun family. And what else? Mormon stuff. Gosh, I have a very, I think, affectionate and complex relationship to the faith. And I guess we could talk about that later or whenever. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jared. And it's so great. It's so great to have you on. And I just have so much respect for both of you. So, so many things to cover today. And I think what I'd like to begin with is asking each of you about your respective interests in Mormon history, because I sense that this didn't come out of the blue for you guys, that both of you had an interest in Mormon history before you ever got interested in this film. So you want to go first, Tyler?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, I was raised as a Mormon here in Utah for the most part. Grew up in California. Then, like all good Mormon Californians, they gravitate towards Utah at some point. So I grew up in Pleasant Grove. I went on a mission, Missouri Independence. I didn't have hernias, so I stayed in Missouri Independence, mostly Kansas and Nebraska, which wasn't terrible. I learned the language, which was helpful later. I then came home. I consequently left the faith after studying and reading and learning a bit more about Mormon history, which was really one of the things that broke the camel's back for me, or the shelf, as it may be. And I think the thing that really hurt me and made it difficult for me to retain my faith was the Book of Abraham. And I read Martha Beck's book, and I remember reading about the Book of Abraham / Pearl of Great Price, and I literally got this feeling in my stomach of, oh my goodness, I have been deceived. And because I felt deceived, I deceived others while I was on my mission, and that set me forth on this kind of path of making these stories about deception and about religion and about faith and belief and why we believe certain things. And that was part of Sons of Perdition and part of An Honest Liar and a big part of Murder Among the Mormons, which I hear is really good.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? I've only been watching Game of Thrones, so I don't.
Wasn't it like top couple movies in the world on Netflix for at least a week or two?
It did, yeah. It was good.
We held number
well.
2 for a while.
Yeah.
Anyways, so of course I have an interest in Mormon history because, and I also have an interest in American history and Western history, and Mormon history is all of those things, and it's interesting characters and fascinating humans and belief and murder and greed and sex and death and polygamy. I mean, it's all those things. And one of those important and interesting topics was, of course, Mark Hofmann, and so. I knew of it somewhat as growing up. I grew up here in Utah, but I can't say I really, when it happened, knew too much about it or followed it as much. And then a number of years ago, probably 5 years ago, Doug Fabrizio, the host of Radio West. I am Doug Fabrizio. Welcome to Radio West. And he gave me a book and said, you should make a documentary about Mark Hofmann. And I read it, and I said, oh, my God, of course I should try and make this documentary. And that started the path.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tyler. And Jared, when I first met you, I was surprised. You're not just study Mormon history kind of in a passé way. You spent a lot of time at Benchmark Books. For years before I ever met you, you were really into Mormon history, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Right. You want to talk about that at all, or?
Love to bro down with Curdy B, Benchmark Books, go splurge on some treats. Yeah, I mean, I just love Mormon history, and I think it's funny. One of my good friends had started to read Rough Stone Rolling right when it came out. I was like, dude, Hess, you got to read this, and I did, and I was like, man, this is a trip. I'd never heard of any of this stuff. So that just kind of launched me on the quest for Mormon weirdness as it relates to history. And I've just become obsessed with it, I think, for the last 15 years or so. So most of the stuff I buy is really like fun, fringe Mormon history. I love reading about all the weird groups that broke off and started their own thing. It's endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think you got on a Strangeite kick for a while, didn't you?
The Strangites. James Strang. He's a real winner. Love reading about like Joseph Morris and the Morrisites.
That's a good band. Sounds like a sounds like
yeah,
60s pop band.
No, but I mean, just all of it. And I think it's once you start becoming incredibly entertained with that kind of stuff, it's like the story of Mark Hofmann. There's nothing more complex and interesting and fascinating and weird. And ultimately, it's a story about nerds.
Right, it is.
And that's very
Are you guys nerds? Do you think of yourselves as
100%.
nerds?
I think Jared's more nerdy than I still,
Tyler's a hunk, I think.
I still hang out that I sit at the jocks table.
Jared, don't you live in Leonard Arrington's old house? Did I get that right?
I do.
That's pretty cool.
Weird.
That's a little
That's
nerdy.
Super nerdy. We still get mail from the VA to Leonard. And it feels very sacred, so I don't throw it away. I just hang on to it. No, we do. We live in Leonard Arrington's old home. And it was funny, some of the older people that live next door, I'd be like, tell me stories about Leonard. I want to know about Leonard. And they said that every afternoon, he was on his back porch clicking away on a typewriter, just writing his latest masterpiece. So it's kind of cool.
Dude's a legend.
I keep hoping to find like some secret stash of plates or something in the backyard. If I go digging around, it's going to find a treasure, some treasures.
Okay. So really quickly, I remember talking to you guys about this at one point, and also maybe an interview you recently did. It's not like this story, people haven't tried to tell this story before. Anything you guys want to say on prior attempts to make this documentary? Is that worth talking about?
Yeah. As we dug deeper into the film, and years later, fast forward years later, I got a big box of materials from Hofmann and from Ken Farnsworth, one of the detectives, and in there was this folder, and Ken Farnsworth had kept everything from the case, and in there was a folder of all of the movie rights that had been attempted to buy for this film and the documentaries. And I also was able to get a hold of a great deal of Mark Hofmann's mail and letters to him, and a lot of them were Hollywood. We want to make your movie. We want to tell your movie. Can we interview you? Can we make a documentary? Can we make it? So just the ones I am aware of, there's dozens and dozens. The bombs were barely cleaned up when Hollywood came knocking. In fact, Mark, before he was incarcerated, had mentioned that Hollywood is interested, to Shannon, that Hollywood is interested in the movie rights. By the way, if you haven't seen the film yet, or the series, you should probably watch it before you listen to this podcast, because it's unlikely that people haven't, but just to let you know, go ahead and watch it and then come back. So yes, a number of people tried to make this story, and it's a complex, difficult, interesting story, and a few entities had made this story, and most of them were like really, really poor investigation discovery, really bad like TV movies that would come in for a week and they'd interview 2 or 3 people, and then they'd try and tell this insanely complex story with vast, rich history and inside characters. They try to tell it in 30 minutes cheaply. And we watched a number of those, and by and large, they're horrible. Some of them are laughably horrible.
Well, I thought they were pretty cool, Tyler, if I'm being honest. Some of the recreations were off the charts, stellar. Like the guy playing Hoffman was just like a handsome devil, like really tall and svelte. He's like, honey, we did it. Look what I found the Anthon transcript. We did it.
They're going to buy it, honey. Can you believe that? I'll have to dig those up. I should dig those clips up and post them.
We should get them to you.
Really great. We aimed high.
They're good. And then the narrator's like, oh boy, Mark just came into some sick cash.
So we were lucky not to make those stories. Look, making a documentary or getting any project off the ground is difficult. It's years, and even if you're seasoned filmmakers like Jared and I, it's still hard to get it off the ground. And Jared and I spent, well, we can go into how we kind of knew each other and met. Our bromance story.
Go for it.
Well, I was working as a camera assistant at BYU, and Tyler was a very hot director at the time, and he was directing a music video for a boy band,
a Mormon boy band.
And I was the focus puller, so I was the camera assistant. So there were probably a lot of unintentionally out of focus shots that blood is on my hands. I'm sorry if that.
So Tyler
ruined the Jericho Road's career.
So Tyler said, "Jared, hold my Diet Coke," basically, and
like
you would carry. You were a Sherpa.
Yeah.
You're basically Tyler Sherpa.
Yeah, yeah.
You've done well since then, Jared.
I've done a lot of camera assistant work. Did not transition into other gigs because I was terrible.
I was a grip for a number of years, dude.
And I pulled focus on Drush and I worked on the Singles Ward films because we were film students at BYU and they didn't have any money. So it's like, who can we train that won't ruin the film? And I mean, if you look at that, there are some horribly out of focus shots that I'm exclusively responsible for.
There are some people who are just their grips and camera assistants, and that's great. I don't think Jared and I ever fell into that. I gripped for a long time.
Yeah.
And one day I remember I was getting on a plane to LA, and I had a girlfriend out there, and I was going to see, and I saw you. Mm-hmm. We chatted for a while. Then we sat next to each other, and you're like, "I'm going to LA. I'm doing this stupid little movie that I'm finishing up," and that was Napoleon Dynamite. And we went to a movie that night. We went and saw Errol Morris, Fog of War.
Yeah.
And
such a good movie.
It's such a great movie. And I was dating an actress at that time, and Jared and her met. And she's just like this comedic actress who was great. So we went to movie, I think, and then I think we just kept kind of bumping into each other over the number of years.
Right.
And when I had this project, the Hofmann story, and I had done some research, and I said, I'm going to just shoot it. I had a break between my MTV film where contracts were taken. I said, to hell with it. I'm just going to go shoot this. So I went and shot Brent Ashworth. I shot like 4 or 5 interviews, and I raised some money.
Metcalf?
No, I didn't shoot Brent Metcalf. I shot like Brent Ashworth. I went out to LA. I interviewed Al Rust, Ken Rendell, who actually was not in the film, a guy named Elwyn Doubleday, who sold Mark the letter that supposedly became the Salamander letter. I interviewed a number of people. I said, I'm going to cut a sizzle. And then from a mutual friend of ours, Duff Rich, I saw him, I bumped into him, and I said, I'm doing this. And he goes, oh my God, you got to talk to Jared. Jared's like obsessed with the story. And so we met for sushi. Mm-hmm. That's your cue to finish.
Oh, geez.
Is that the same place I met you for sushi?
Probably.
Okay.
It's real good.
It's super good.
Hi, sush. Yeah, we met for sush, and then, at the end of it, after 4 tall glasses of Diet Coke, it was like, let's do it. Let's join forces. Let's start writing Hofmann letters together.
And then we did that Hofmann, Shannon Flynn handshake.
The arm clasp.
That was it.
And that was it.
But then we cut the sizzle together, and then we took it out. Like we just took it, and we went to LA and we pitched it to every entity, and then we went to New York and we pitched to every entity, and we had a great sizzle. And one day I'll let people watch it because it's actually a really good sizzle. And a sizzle is basically a trailer you make that kind of says this is what the film's going to be about, and is essential in today's documentary making world.
Right.
And we got nowhere. We got passes. Everyone turned it down.
Yeah, it wasn't right. It was weird. Like the zeitgeist for it was kind of wrong. It was kind of this weird thing, but we kept pushing it. And then it's like, oh, the biggest place on the planet wants it, as far as streamers go.
Even though Netflix turned it down previously.
Initially, but it was weird. I think like the people there at the time were kind of on their way out. Right. Like when we pitched it, it was like they were already leaving the company to go somewhere else. So it was just weird. The timing wasn't right. And then
what made it pop?
Well, I think it was just, it's like you only need one home for it, right? And the BBC heard about it. Tyler pitched it to BBC America, or they found it.
Oh, who's
Cole
a good friend of ours, introduced us to Alejandro Melendez, who's a former Utahn as well, and I believe he's actually a Mormon.
Yeah.
And he loved the story. He came on.
Right. And so we partnered with BBC and then went out with it again.
And they brought in Joe Berlinger, which is a big deal.
Totally. Joe Berlinger, he directed the Ted Bundy tapes, the Paradise Lost series. I mean, just kind of a legend, true crime documentary filmmaker. So he joined the party, vouched for us, and then we went out again, and Netflix was like, let's go. And by that time, Netflix had a totally different group of executives. So that, I think that changed things a little bit.
Yeah, and
well,
I think true crime was a little more interesting, a little more hot at that point. So, but that was 3 years of us trying to push that boulder up the hill before Netflix came on.
You pitched this for 3 years?
We worked on it.
I would say 2 years. Oh, wow. Yeah, 2 years of pitching.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It's good. You just, what? Every film, you just need one home for it. That's all that you need. And you'll get passes all over the place, but it needs to connect with like one set of people, and then you're good.
There's a bit of vendetta. I'm used to getting no's, and we're used to no's in this industry. It just happens. And I kind of relish them in some ways because for me, and Jared's the same way. Jared he puts a lot into it. We don't go into anything half-ass. But if I'm going to pitch something and if they say no, I just feel like it's on them. Like I never want to walk out of a pitch and go, I flubbed that. I threw an 85 mile an hour fastball down the middle. I want to say that I did everything I could. And if they turned it down, it's because they made a mistake. And so there was this always like when they passed, I was like, okay, I'm going to keep making this and you're going to watch it and you're going to go, I made a mistake in turning that down. So we were driven to make this story.
Yeah.
I love it. So Tyler, you may not want to talk about this and you just say, I have nothing to say about that. But I remember talking to you very, very early on. And your goal was to get Mark, but then if you couldn't get Mark, you had some creative ideas of what to do. Now, if you don't want to talk about that, you don't have to. But I wanted to ask you if you wanted to talk about.
Sure.
That.
Look.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. And every film goes
puppets.
through such.
Some
sock puppets.
That's actually not a bad idea. The Mark Hofmann saga told.
Yes, sock puppets.
Brent, buy this document. Okay. So no, look, every film goes through various incarnations. You always want it to be this version, and then it ends up being something else. And I think I'm glad I didn't do it this aspect, but it was very much kind of initially it was kind of a Joseph Smith, Mark Hofmann hybrid, where we kind of told the story of Joseph Smith and Mark Hofmann, and they almost made appearances, both talking to each other in some aspects and trying to do something very bold and very creative and very unique. And shortly, I just learned that's not, there's enough in the Mark Hofmann story.
Because everybody, you probably got sick of people going, make the next going clear, make the next going clear. You know what I mean? I remember talking to you about that, and you're like, that movie's already been done.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And look, I don't. The Mark Hofmann story is so much of Mormonism in so many ways. It is the culture of Utah. It is a history of Mormonism. It is greed. It is deceit. It is the history of America in many ways, as Mark found the Oath of a Free Man. It is such this big story that to clutter it anymore and to make it like an ex or anti-Mormon movie it would just be betraying the actual reality of what the story is.
Yeah. And would limit the people who know the story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like you don't want to do the audience's work for them. And any time that there's such a strong, preachy point of view that's telling the audience exactly what to think, it's so boring. I think people, get tired of being almost talked down to in that respect. So for me, it's like any analogy or any parallels or connections people make, it's like, let the audience do that. Just tell the story as it is. And we, again, we wanted to let people that lived it, that were connected to Mark, that experienced this stuff firsthand, be able to tell their story. And to us, that was the most impactful thing. I mean, it's one thing to be able to read about it in a book, but that, you know, to hear and see Brent Metcalf kind of relive and regurgitate these horrific moments that he lived through, and hear and see the emotion on his face is like, man, I mean, and for Dory and for Al Russ, like everybody involved. So that was the intent, again, is to like let people tell their story and have us kind of stay out of the way. But again, I think, yeah, people can draw their own connections and parallels that they see without us kind of heavy-handed trying to force something down their throats, you know. And as far as like an expose or something like that for the church, is like, that's so incredibly boring too, because nobody outside of Utah or I think even outside of the ex-Mormon community even cares about that, right? It's like they already think...
Certainly not believing Mormons.
Right. Yeah, it's like the rest of the world already believes that Mormonism is Hogwarts, right? They believe that it's fiction. And so us going like, well, we're going to go deep into sorcery and the corruption that exists with Hagrid.
Kolob. Let's talk about Kolob.
It's like, it's just, it's a waste of time, because again, like if you don't believe that religion, you already, you know, you think it's fiction. So anyway.
And you limit the audience. I was just going to say, I was out shoveling in my front yard some dirt Saturday.
Looking for treasure.
Yeah, no. And my neighbor, believing Mormon,
right,
comes up to me, and I was on the phone at the time, and I was talking to someone about interviewing you guys, and he's like, "Hey, I heard you talking about Murder Among the Mormons," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, believing neighbor, nice guy.
Right.
Did you see it?" He's like, "Yeah, I saw all 3 hours. Because I live at Holiday, by the way. Does that ring a bell, fellas?
Yeah, it's where the Sheets lived.
And he's like, "Oh, I grew up on Kentucky Avenue, you know, and I knew these people." And he's like, I'm like, "Well, did you watch it?" He's like, "Yeah, I loved it. Watched the whole 3 hours, and all my family did." And I was like, "Oh, what'd you think?" And he's like, "I loved it. I thought it was fair. I thought it was." And, you know, that was just for me confirmation of your strategy, because if you make something that offends people, that turns it off, that turns them off, that makes the church want to attack it, that makes the church want to warn everyone not to see it, and that is only viewed by a really small niche of people, you've totally failed. Whereas if you do a tasteful, balanced, professional documentary, it becomes the #2 movie in the world on Netflix. And I think, you know, for all the ex-Mormons that were like, "Oh, they weren't mean enough, they didn't punch the church enough," I understand the anger. I understand why they wanted that.
Sure.
But I think that showed a lot of wisdom on your guys' part to take that approach.
I mean, ultimately, we were true to the story. I mean, it really comes down to that. And a lot of people are like, "Why didn't you tell this story in this story?" And the fact of the matter is in many aspects, we kind of did. We had a first cut that was very long, you know.
You only got 3 hours, right? From Netflix.
It was less than 3 hours. You know, and we tried to fit in a lot of things. And ultimately, it was just like, yawn, this is boring. Let's tell a through line. And documentary is tough because if you introduce something early, you have to finish it. You can't just throw something in without a reason. Every scene has to have a beginning, middle, end, and it has to drive the story forward. And if it doesn't, then you're failing. And there's so much in there. The most important part about making a film is not what you put in, but what you leave out.
Yeah. Yep.
And a lot of stuff hit the cutting room floor.
Was it originally 6-hour conceptualization?
We pitched it as that.
We pitched it. I mean, there's so much material. It's like, I mean, so initially when we pitched it, it was 6 1-hour episodes, and we had more than enough material to be able to sustain that.
I wonder if Netflix regrets that decision.
I don't think they do. I think people, weirdly, I think people's viewing habits have kind of dictated what their new system of ordering true crime is. And I think stuff that goes into 6 episodes, people kind of tune out, and they'll binge 3 though. So I think that's where
it's odd the amount of reviews and things that we've gotten lately, and a lot of them are like, it was too much, it was too long. And I'm like, it's actually not that long. I mean, even though it's 3 episodes, they're less than an hour.
I could have had 6 hours or 10. It wasn't enough. I mean, it's like all over. Yeah. But I mean, yeah.
Just be happy for what it is. And you know, totally. One of our reviews was like, it was too long or too short. I can't decide. I was like, that literally, that was I'm basically the same quote. I'm like, that sounds perfect. Like the bed is too hard or too soft. The medium one's right. So we tried to cram a lot in. One of the things we did is we brought in these 2 editors, brilliant guys, Greg O'Toole and Matt Prekop. And Greg I'd worked with on An Honest Liar. And they know nothing. They're not Mormons. They're California guys. And I said before they came in, I was like, why don't you read a book about it? And both of them were like, we don't want to know anything. We just want to come in cold. And so I remember they'd come here and we had at my office, we had a wall and it had like all the note cards, and Jared and I had laid out all the note cards, and it just filled the whole freaking wall of just like every scene. And we pitched it and said this and then this and then this and then this. And they just go, that's a lot. That is, you've got like 12 endings, they said. And I'm like, but we got to talk about Mark Hofmann and Ron Lafferty being prison mates. Yeah. And they're just like, we can't go that deep. Yeah. We can't tell that much story. And eventually, of course, they were right. You know, and when you do make a film, you always want to tell this much, and then it always tends to whittle down. Yeah. And it's better to have more good stories than not enough, of course.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add? Or
no, I mean, you know, to me, all the fascinating nuggets were like me putting my excited, you know, Mormon fringe history, like all the details that were always, as Tyler would say, too inside baseball. But it was like, you know, there was one story I remember reading in one of the books. Well, it was cool because, you know, Tyler had gotten, through the Freedom of Information Act, access to all of basically the case files that the state had on Hofmann. And I remember he was going through a bunch of the photos, and Tyler was like, man, what the heck is this photo from? And it was like a photograph of a table that had some plates and some spectacles and some like missionary arms sitting on it. And we were like, what is that from? And I remembered in one of the books, when Hofmann was on his mission, he visited a museum in Bath, England, or Bath, I guess is how you pronounce it. And somebody had donated to the library or museum a bunch of fake, some dude named, I think, William Parrott or something, had tried to dupe the church into buying these fake plates and spectacles that he'd like made, and tried to sell them to the church, and they sniffed that turd from a mile away, and they're like, no thanks. And anyway, this set got donated, and Hofmann got access to it and took photographs of it. And it was such a fascinating thing. Like, okay, already the whole forgery, like how can I make some sweet cheddar off of forgeries, started like on the Mish, which, but again, it was a detail that we just didn't have time for. And there were a gazillion details that, again, with a limited amount of real estate, you just don't have time for. But ultimately, a lot of those things that we were excited about, you know, our editors were a good barometer of like, boring. and then we test screen, you know, we did an early test screening of the 3 episodes clear back in August with people that know jack squat about Mormonism, have no connection to it.
And believing Mormons at the same time.
True. Yeah. A few, yeah. But colleagues like in the industry to watch it and be like, hey, is this enough Mormonism for you to understand what the heck is going on and why the salamander letter was such a big deal? And so we spent a lot of time kind of gauging that. But anything that ended up that was exciting for like this amount of people was always boring for like the audience at large.
Yeah. So. Oddly enough, when we did that test screening, the majority of people came back and said, we need a little bit more Mormonism just to set it up. And we were struggling how to tell that story. And I remember, like, how do we establish Mormonism? And for a while, it was just talking heads. It was like Richard Turley talking about Joseph Smith and Sandra Tanner talking about Joseph Smith. And I go, you know, I was raised on those Mormon film strips and Mormon videos that just, yeah.
Are you going to the dance library tonight?
Beep. Yeah. No, I'm not. Don't drink that coffee. It's bad for you. So, and of course, our editors knew nothing about that. But I was like, this is the best way to tell the story. So I dug into this.
There's the Mormon.
There's this weird, crazy website. It's like
it's called Hard to Find Mormon Videos.
Yeah, and I just like went deep into that and just started looking, and we found all these videos. And I'm like, let the Mormon Church tell their own story through their own audiovisual propaganda, if you will.
I love that term, by the way. I remember I had a seminary teacher in Idaho who's like, now, Jared, are you still studying audiovisuals? Are you going to school to study audiovisuals? It's great. I work in the audiovisual industry.
It's so funny because one critical reviewer used those movies produced by the church to claim that you guys were being anti-Mormon in your treatment of the documentary. But I just thought it was, I wanted to, I mean, it, oh, anyway, so good. So keep going.
Like,
keep going.
actually, we're just fanboys.
So, all right. So let's talk really quickly about, I've got like 1,000 questions. We'll just rapid fire them. Your attempts to try and get Mark to do an interview, because he's still alive. He's still in Utah, and he may even be in contact with people. I've talked to people who have spoken with him extensively. So do you guys want to talk about your attempts to try and get Mark to do an interview?
I started writing him immediately when I found out about the story. And
Hoffman's
said,
the worst pen pal ever. He never replies.
But I kept getting letters from Joseph Smith and Martin Harris. I don't know if that's him.
But
I wrote him immediately. Like I started writing him letters, and to no avail. And I thought, okay, there's a way I can get in here. And then I found out that Shannon Flynn was one of the last non-family members to visit him. And we tracked down Shannon, and we had dinner with him at an Italian restaurant. And he just wanted to quote movie, like Godfather movies, because like that's what you do when you're talking with filmmakers, is you quote movies, right? And he was like ecstatic to meet. He was so happy to be like just a part of this. And he hadn't met with Mark in a long, long time. And but of course he came on and wanted to be a part of the documentary, and it's actually very helpful in finding us. He introduced the story, and he had boxes of Hofmann materials, so he was able to give it to us. And I just kept writing Mark and trying. And one day I put myself, because you have to be on the list to visit him, and I put myself on the list, and I sent it in, and I got a letter back and says, "You are on the list." And I couldn't I couldn't believe it. I might swear. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can I test it and just go, shh, penis? That'll break the ice. So I was so amazed that I got the letter, and I was like, I'm going to go visit Mark. What am I going to do? And then 2 days later I called, and they said, "Oh, he's taken you off the list." So for some reason he wanted me to go, and then he changed his mind. I don't know why, but ultimately I've written him over a dozen letters and heard nothing back at all. So.
I've only written him one.
You did?
Just one.
You didn't hear back?
Didn't hear back.
Any idea why? Like if I were him, like one of the things people say about him, well, I'm going to talk about his motives in just a second, but one of the things people say is he just wanted attention. He wanted to be relevant. He wanted to be the cool guy, kind of a big shot. It reminds me of the guy that killed John Lennon, right? He just wanted attention.
Mark David Chapman.
But if he's that much of an attention whore, then why wouldn't he look at this as a chance to tell a story and resuscitate his reputation and explain things? I guess you guys don't know because you didn't talk to him.
I don't know. I think I don't know.
He's waiting for me, is what he's waiting for Mormon Stories.
He's waiting for an exclusive.
Right. John DeLid, Mormon Stories.
I don't think, I mean, he's gotten so many letters in the past that I don't think, and even when I wrote him and like, dude, this is going to be on Netflix. I don't think he really knew what Netflix is. I mean, he's in a jail cell, and I don't think they have Netflix. So I don't think he really knew the gravity of how big the story was and how many people are going to watch it, which is, tens of millions of people already, we've been told by Netflix. So I don't think he knows, but frankly, Mark lived a life of secrecy. And yeah, I read his psychological report. I wasn't allowed. I read it when I got the Freedom of Information Act, and I scanned it. I went to the district attorney's office. They had boxes, literally boxes all the way up to the ceiling. And they said, "You have a day to go through it." And I just geeked out. And I begged them for one more day, but they allowed me to look at them and put a Post-it note on all the things that I wanted. And then they made copies. And one of them was his psychological report in prison. And I read it as fast as I could, and then I put a Post-it note. When I came back, it was just like black. It was literally like just redacty-orama. But one of them said that he is a narcissist. Yeah. It also said something about him, having like a sexual deviant. But that's another podcast. So I do think he wanted this story to be known, and I do think he has a narcissism. But I just think the only power he wields right now is his story. And he's in a jail cell in Gunnison. And I think knowing that millions, tens of millions of people are talking about him and he's not talking, I think that's just a little secret that he can just keep, that, you know, keeps that little deception fire burning inside him.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought it was super cool that Turley was in it. And I also know that a lot of that footage came from KSL, which means you couldn't get Hofmann, but it seems like the church on some level was willing to cooperate. You guys want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So I'd never met Richard Turley. I'd been a fan of like all of his books and all of his work, and just his approach to history I've always respected and loved. And my grandmother was a Turley. Her maiden name is Turley. So they're my grandma and Richard Turley are related weirdly through polygamy. And so anyway, but when Tyler and I were starting the project, I mean, Rick wrote the amazing book, Victims, and he was head of public affairs for the church when we interviewed him in February 2020. And then he retired shortly thereafter in March. But he was so helpful in getting us access to, you know, putting in a good word for us, I think, you know, with KSL and helping us kind of take that first leap and being able to secure the archival footage. Because generally, I think that they've had a policy there where they don't really send out stuff about Mark Hofmann or the Lafferty brothers or, did I say Hoffman? Or
Yeah.
Ted Bundy. Yeah, as well. So, so that was a bit of a hurt, but it was like, hey, like we're just, you know, using this to tell the story, to put the audience in that moment. Like, this is what people were thinking. This is what they were worried about. People didn't know what was going on in those first 2 days of the bombings. I mean, it was just like, who could be doing this? Why? And they had Hoffman's first and kind of only recorded interview, at least that was on film, when he found the Anthon transcript. And that was crucial. And we had really busted VHS copies of it that were just kind of hard to look at. They had all the masters. And so being able to get that and hearing him right out of the gate with his first home run discovery and him talk about it. And when you watch it now, he's kind of like, well, it's pretty exciting that the golden plates were just right there. You know, this is the first Joseph Smith holograph. You know, you're like, holy cow. Like, I mean, but he's kind of smiling. Like you watch it knowing that he's a fraud now, and you're like, dude, he's just got this crap-eating grin on his face. Like, like he's just pulling one over. I mean, it's like, oh man, he's just kind of smirking like, wow, I'm really getting away with this. Wow, Dory, this is exciting.
People, sometimes I'm disappointed with the ex-Mormon community, because there were ex-Mormons that on Reddit that wanted this to be a massive hit piece, and they basically said that you guys were somehow bought off or like manipulated by the church, or, you know. And I knowing you guys, I think that is hilarious. Like, Jared, you're doing a big belly laugh, like
it's the QAnon of ex-Mormon. You know, it's like these guys. It's like the church would support a smoking gun pointed to their head about this. You know, they pay money to take themselves down. It's like, what? Yeah, not really. No. I mean, the great thing I think with this story is like the church, they know how it ends, and they know what occurred because they lived through it, right? So there's nothing to hide. It's like, yes, leaders made big mistakes along the way that looked shady and weird, like they were trying to cover things up, but ultimately it's like everybody was friggin' scrambling with what do we do with these documents that totally throw upside down like what we were told that occurred from Joseph Smith, their founder. So
yeah, I will tell everyone, like the Mormon church, and no one had influence over this. You know, Jared and I, we were able to tell the story for the most part we wanted to tell. And that includes, you know, we got notes from Netflix. We had a dozen producers who gave us notes, but the good thing about having made films before with Jared and I is we were able to like say, we want to try this and this is how we want to do it. And it was really nice. So no, the Mormon church did not affect it. And the fact of the matter is look, tens of millions of people are being introduced to the Mormon church right now in places that the Mormon church couldn't reach. And that's for better or worse. You know, there are people who are out there going, oh my God, there's angels, and this dude, an angel appeared to him in his bedroom. And one of our editors, Matt, was like, I was like, we should make more of a comparison of angels and make more of the salamander being weird. And he goes, dude, what's the difference between a salamander and an angel? Like, they're both outlandish. And that's where I mean, honestly, a salamander is more likely to appear to someone. I've seen a salamander. I've never seen a talking one, but for me, that's like, they're both crazy. So just let the audience. And my favorite filmmaking quote is Billy Wilder. He said, "Let the audience figure out 2 + 2 and they'll love you for it." And so we show Joseph Smith uncovering plates at the beginning of the film in the ground. And later in the film, we show Mark Hofmann finding a jar of coins later in the ground. And if someone is astute enough, they can put those 2 and 2 together. But do we need to put those shots next to each other for the audience to understand it? No. So you can take from it what you want. But no, the Mormon Church did not strong arm us.
I had a comedian friend who just finished, he was out in Boston, and he just finished watching the series, and he was really funny. He was like, "Wow, a salamander, huh? Versus an angel. What a disgrace." Like, he was just like, it's such like a lateral move, right? I mean, kind of, it's like the rest of the world's like, whoop-de-doo, why was this such a big deal? And it is, you have to understand that, like, gosh, this is a sacred story that definitely falls within, I mean, it Turley says it, Christian familiar terms like angels and God, but if it's twisted toward like this pagan kind of witchcraft language with toads and salamanders and the occult, that could be freaky, right?
Yeah, I love it. I'm guessing you guys wanted to get Oaks or other apostles or First Presidency members.
I mean, not really.
No?
The thing is we thought about it, and there are actually a number of people we interviewed that hit the cutting room floor, and in the end, it was really just about the inside story, the people that were there.
Mm-hmm.
Oaks was kind of there.
Oaks was kind of there, and I think we broached it to Turley, didn't he? And he was like,
"We did," and I think he reached out, but it's like they're incredibly busy, and this would probably be the last thing on their list to want to do, right. And then also be a part of. But and it's fine though. But one of the stories that we George Throckmorton, who's one of he's the guy that kind of broke open the whole case. So LDS guy, total amazing science nerd. In the film, he's like, "I got into science because I don't like dealing with people." and like, we've seen memes and T-shirts of him now since the film's come out. But he tells the story that he went initially when the whole idea of forgery was very new, I think, to the whole investigative team. And he said, "Hey, like, for me to be able to kind of even determine if these Hofmann documents that came through his hands are forgeries, I need to get access to everything that the church has that we know is authentic, that they've had in their archives since the beginning, and I need to compare them to Hofmann stuff." And so they initially had a meeting where Throckmorton went, and he told the story to us on camera, where he went, met with, I think, the church's lawyers, the Curtin and McConkie dudes, and was like, "Hey, I need to get access to this stuff." And this is very early, like in the weeks following, and they were like, "Nope, can't do it. We're not going to give you access to anything." And Throckmorton was just ticked. He's like, "And I slammed my hand down on the table and I walked out." And then the next day, or a couple days later, Oaks said, "We will not have it be known on the records of the church that we did not cooperate with the law to the fullest extent." And then he was like, "Let them have whatever they need." So Oaks came back and said, "Hey, we got to open it up. We need to give access to everything." And so they set up shop, Throckmorton and Bill Flynn, in the church office building when they were like, had their microscopes going and, comparing everything. And that's when they, discovered the cracked ink. So, I mean, that was a story to me that was super, super fascinating. I think the people in the know would have loved that story. Incredibly boring to the rest of the world. Yeah. They were like, "Great, another white guy from Utah pushing back on the investigation. Now what? Oh, but they gave him access." So, I mean, but to me, I was like, "We got to get that in there. This is an incredible, it's a fascinating story. There's some drama and conflict." But it was just like, dee-dee for everybody else. So there you go.
All right. So one of the things that I, as someone who has studied psychology, I really wanted to get into Mark Hofmann's head. And what I really wanted to do was to kind of project all of my life as much as possible into Mark Hofmann's story without making myself a murderer, right? Like, And but like, of course, I deal a huge chunk of my audience, just a percentage, because we have active believing Mormons, bishops, stake presidents who regularly listen to Mormon Stories.
I shouldn't have said penis then, huh?
No, I think they could take it.
Okay, good.
But I wanted to project into Hofmann like this guy who learned early that the church wasn't true, learned early that the brethren had not been honest about its history, that felt disillusioned. Maybe he had some sexual deviance that made him feel shamed and awful about himself. And so this whole thing was sort of a way for him. He couldn't come out because back in the 70s, you come out, you're toast. You know, you lose your marriage, you lose your family. It's even worse than it is now, if you can believe it. So I wanted to project into Mark Hofmann this kind of guy who had, you know, who had been disillusioned and hurt, and so his motives were understandable, and then who just took it too far, and then it just got out of control like a bad Ponzi scheme, and then it blew up and he became a murderer. But from all the people I've talked to, including Sandra Tanner and others, it's probably that narrative is probably not going to fly. So do you guys want to talk about his early years and his motives, as much or as little as you want? Because that's interesting to me.
You know, I'm speculating here, but I think I may have entered more of his mind than anyone. And I've spent 4 years researching Mark, and I have accumulated so much of his materials, his mission journal, his childhood journal, his letters he wrote, everything. I've talked to every single person I could who's involved in it. So, I mean, I know this dude well, I'd like to think. And of course, nobody knows Mark Hofmann well. And one of his letters I remember reading that he wrote to his wife said, you know, everyone thinks they know me, but nobody knows me but me, as I always say. So Mark has his own secrets and his own motivations, and nobody will ultimately know that. But as far as Mark's childhood and going back, you know, I mean, we cover a bit of it in the film, but I think Mark, first and foremost, I think he's brilliant. I think he's incredibly intelligent and driven to be intelligent. So he was curious, very curious individual who, like a lot of boys growing up in small towns in Utah, they did stupid shit. Like they'd blow up mailboxes, and he'd, you know, mess around with cats, which is actually an unfortunate thing that we left out, that he was kind of interested in hurting cats.
Like Dahmer.
A bit like Dahmer. But without all the soy sauce added in it, I guess, if that Dahmer used.
Dark.
But I think Mark just had like this need to deceive and was very good at it. And I think initially one of the things that Mark was interested in as a child was magic tricks. And he loved doing magic. He loved deceiving. And I even one of his letters, he says that. I loved deceiving people with magic and the power that had. But one thing, and I know a bit about magicians, I did a documentary about magic, is one thing I revere about magicians is the ability to keep the secret. Not just to do the bloody trick, but to say, I'm not going to tell you how I did it. And that power that Mark probably felt as a child. When he forged the mint mark on a coin at the age of 14 and sent it into the U.S. Treasury, I think that, imagine, I remember being a kid, you know, changing my report card and fooling my mom. Secret's out, Mom. I like, you felt a little something like I did it. I pulled that off. I can't believe I pulled that off. And they believed it. An adult believed that. He sent the coin into the U.S. Treasury, and they sent him a letter saying that it's real. He took that coin into a dealer, and they said it's real. And he sold it for a great deal of money. Like, the power that he must have felt, and knowing that he can't tell. Now I can't tell people that because I just sold this coin for thousands of dollars, and I don't have the money to take it back. That must have been like intoxicating for this young man. So that, I think, set him on this course of, I can get away with anything if I just tell people that it's true.
Power tripping.
But so yes, all that, but I do believe that motives are usually multifaceted. And there is no question that he had been studying church history very early on, that he had lost his faith, and that he was angry at the brethren on some level and wanted to kind of get back at them and embarrass them. And that shows that somehow some of this stuff factored in, no?
I mean, you know, one of the people that we interview in the film is Tyler's cousin, Ron Measom,
right,
who was his buddy in college up at Utah State before his mission and after his mission. And it actually gone to Hofmann's mission farewell and everything.
Yeah, he said the prayer. Hoffman said the prayer at his mission farewell.
Oh, it runs.
Yeah, and it's interesting because of all the books I've read and all the things I read, nobody ever talked to him. And he was, for the most part, Mark's only friend in college. So.
And it's wild, but Hofmann would go to Tyler's cousin's family's home and talk about all, as he was learning about, I guess, the skeletons in the closet of church history and just the contradictions and some of the more depressing stuff, you could see him kind of testing the waters with faithful members to see, kind of what would spark their worry or what would evoke a real emotional response. And it was fascinating hearing Tyler's cousin talk about that kind of stuff. Because it was a little window into his state of mind leading up to the Anthon transcript discovery, because that was all at Utah State. He just gotten married to Dory. He was studying chemistry. He was pre-med up there. And then obviously once he hit this home run and came into some money with the Anthon transcript, it's like, I'm going to do this full time.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, as far as like him, he said he became an atheist at a very young age, and that's something documented that he confesses to. But it was interesting when we were in Connecticut, I think, and I can't remember who. One of the experts on Hofmann has quite a collection of actual Hofmann stuff, and he had
John Resnikoff. He had Hoffman's high school chemistry book, and in like Hoffman's weird little chicken scratch, and has horrible penmanship, and he doesn't spell very well either. But he'd drawn a picture, like a stick figure of Jesus getting hung, and it said, "Why was Jesus crucified and not hung?" And it was like, but he spelled hung wrong.
He spelled it H-U-N-D, and then crucified like with an S. And it was like, who's thinking about this disturbing crap? Like in high school, you know, like why was he killed this way instead of this way? And it was such like, wow, this is the kind of stuff he was thinking about and talking. And he could have just been goofing off too, right? But it was like a little weird nugget. My
cousin Ron, and he told some stories. One of them was that, and these, unfortunately, we tried to put them in the film and just couldn't. There was no place for it. He said that when he went to his dorm in college, Mark once pulled out a shoebox from under the bed, and it was full of writing instruments and pens and inks. And he'd opened up a notebook, and he had practiced like a bunch of signatures and handwriting. And he said Mark told him, I'm practicing signatures. And in there was George Washington and Joseph Smith. And this was him like kind of revealing that he was doing this, early. And that's the first time I've ever heard that. There was a story in the film that we tried like hell to put in, and it was when everyone was at a restaurant in Boston, and Dory was there, and I think Shannon Flynn was there, and Brent Metcalf, I believe, was there. I can't remember, but they'd gone to some book fair, and they were sitting at a table, and the table was paper, and there were crayons or pens, and everyone was like doodling, and Mark just popped off this amazing George Washington signature. And then he popped off a Joseph Smith, and then he popped off a Mark Twain. And just one after another, he just, strung these signatures together exact. And everyone was kind of amazed that he could do that. And of course he goes, it's just something I do. And this was,
what?
Yeah, I know. And nobody, it never registered 2 + 2 that, he just... Yeah. Forged a George Washington signature, and 3 months later, he found a George Washington letter,
And nobody was even in the headspace of forgery at that time, though. I mean, this is like in the mid 80s, leading up to the bombing. So people just thought, oh, yeah, he's seen a bunch of them. Oh, he can bang them out. That's cool. But in hindsight, people are like, holy dang.
Yeah, nobody mentioned forgery. The funny thing is everyone says, oh, well, how come so many people were able to, no, and he fooled so many people. But Mark was, he was a brilliant forger, and we can go into that later. He was really, really good at it. B, he would never just find the documents himself. A lot of times he'd have Lynn Jacobs, an associate, find it, or Shannon Flynn would, quote unquote, find it. So he'd give it to Shannon and say, Shannon, go sell this. Or C, he was the only one who was doing this. You know, D. Michael Quinn was like, I asked him, I was like, why did no one question? He goes, look, he was the only guy whose full-time job was to find documents, and that's it. And so, of course, he would uncover certain things. But nobody ever thought forgery. Nobody. And I know people say, oh, Gerald Tanner did. And Gerald Tanner did to some aspects. Gerald Tanner believed that the Salamander letter was a forgery. And that's because it was closely akin to Mormonism Unveiled, which he said is too similar. However, he never said to Mark it's a forgery.
He said it in a newsletter that Sandra shopped around.
He never said Mark forged it. He said it was forged.
Forgery of the time.
One incident, the only incident I've heard of, is Mark presented Brent Ashworth with some hole-in-the-wall photos, Butch Cassidy, and there were photos, and on the back it was like listed, the Butch Cassidy or whomever it was, and these were photos that were sent out to sheriffs in the Old West, like wanted cards, if you will. And he presented them to Brent, and he goes, these are forgeries. And Mark was, well, okay, I must have bought them as a forgery. I'll take them back. So that's the only time that I've heard that anyone called out Mark Hofmann as a forgery. And then he just passed it off. Oh, I must have bought them as forgers. So nobody suspected. And that includes everyone from the FBI to Sotheby's to every renowned document examiner prior to him being bombed or bombing.
Right.
Spoiler alert.
There's bombings?
Episode 2.
Well, when I think about like Magneto of the X-Men, I think about like a broken, devious, murderer with a cause. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like Hoffman had motive.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you ask him, it's money. And he'll say it was money. I don't think that's necessarily true, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, in his confession transcript, he's like, well, I didn't want to take down the church. Well, let me take that back. Maybe I did. or not take down the church, but rewrite history or change history. And he totally did, because he knew the history. He knew how fun it would be. I mean, again, it was like he was just power tripping. He loved the feeling he had by pulling one over on people and to be able to rewrite history. It's like there are documents that have been quoted in modern history books, like in the 2000s, that later in their second edition, they have had to go back and go, oops, we just found out this is a Hofmann turd. So we were wrong about, you know what I mean? Like that's happened on a number of occasions. So
yeah,
they're still out there, man.
So let's go ahead and talk about the forgeries. So I had John Hamer on last week. We went through kind of all of his major Mormon-related forgeries, from the second anointing letter that he gave to the Tanners in the late 70s, to the Anthon manuscript, to the Joseph Smith III forgery, to the Josiah Stoll letter,
right,
about treasure digging, and then of course the big one being the Salamander letter. Anything you guys want to say about his Mormon forgeries?
Nope, nothing at all. I want that keep getting that money from the church.
One of the cool things that we had was, Hoffman, he recorded a lot of his conversations with people on the phone. There was a point where he got kind of paranoid that his phone was being tapped. And this is probably 83, 84, 85, when he, I think when, again, privately, his whole Ponzi scheme was, people were coming after him. And so he started to record conversations. But early on with the Joseph Smith III blessing, Tyler and I found on one of his answering machine tapes a conversation he was having with the RLDS Church in trying to negotiate a deal for the Joseph Smith III blessing, which he had forged, and he was playing the LDS Church and the RLDS Church to try and get
as much money as he could, right?
As he could. Yeah. But it was, again, and those were fascinating. I mean, you could have done a whole episode on the stories of each of those documents. The Josiah Stoll letter, it was a money digging letter about Joseph, trying to find some sweet Spanish gold with like 2 rods, on Josiah Stoll's property. And then, but then it was like, then there was the Lucy Mack Smith letter, which is the first account of, it was purported to be, wow, this is the first document of the recollections of Joseph Smith's mom, of his kind of religious thinking back in the day. And Brent Ashworth bought it, and he was like, oh, I about fell off the chair when I first read it. I mean, that's in the film. But yeah, I mean,
there's the Grandin document as well, the Grandin contract. There's the letter that Joseph Smith wrote in I don't want to say, not Carthage jail, but Liberty. No, the other one of the jails he was in. The last one. The last letter he supposedly wrote.
Carthage.
Was it Carthage?
Yeah.
So there were so many documents and so many letters that he forged and things. And initially we wanted to put a lot of those in, and we just couldn't. Like, it was just like, do we need more documents to confuse the audience? Let's just concentrate on the Anthon, the Salamander, the McClellan, and the Oath.
Yeah, the ones that cause the most drama.
Right, because otherwise we're just swimming in so many documents.
Because people be like, what in the crap is the Josiah Stoll letter? I don't know who that is.
Yeah, and again, it's like you have to explain these things. I think the most difficult thing we had to do in the film was explain the Salamander letter. I can't tell you how many cuts we had of that, where we just like, it's not enough, it's too much, we can't. Why do we have to explain who is Martin Harris? Why the hell does that matter? It's so difficult. And if we had to do that with the Stoll and the Grandin and everything else, it's just like it's exhausting.
And it was a note that we got from our amazing team at Netflix. They were like, yeah, it'd be great if we just had one little analogy for people that still don't get it, that don't understand what the disruption, the salamander, because again, right, people still watch it and they're like, who cares? It's lizard, angel, whatever. Anyway, so we were like, oh man, so we tried to come up with some analogies, right? Like, what's a good analogy? And so we went and talked to Sandra Tanner and got some sound bites from her to kind of try and explain it. And then we went to our boy, Rod Decker, and he was like, I got one. Let's roll. And he's like, that would be as if someone found documents that said that Moses had gotten the 10 Commandments from the ghost of Elvis Presley. I mean, Tyler like,
I heard Jared recorded it, and I fell over laughing. It was so funny. So
perfect.
He's so great.
You were like,
so great.
Thanks, Rod. I think that sums it up. That's a great analogy.
I love Rod Decker. Every time you call him, he goes, Decker here. That's how he answers his phone. Live at 10 o'clock news. This is Rod Decker. Go.
He's a legend.
He's so great.
Dude's a legend.
Amazing. He's amazing.
His interview was so amazing. Like the cutting room floor stuff. I interviewed him. Jared and I switched off. He'd interview someone. I'd interview someone. And I interviewed Rod. And Jared would just be busted. They had to go in the next room because Jared would be laughing his ass off. And all of these. I remember his first thing. I was like, okay, Mr. Decker, could you kind of set up the Mormon world? And he goes, I don't want to get this wrong. Let me just make sure.
I can't even remember.
He goes,
what he said.
He told a joke. He goes, how can you tell a Mormon wedding? The bride isn't pregnant, but the mother is. And that was like how he defined Utah.
Oh yeah.
And that was in an early cut. We just had to take it out, but he was such a great interview, and we fortunately we were lucky to keep him in most of his stuff. Just not that joke.
We interviewed D. Michael Quinn, and I interviewed him, and I loved it because it was like, you're just like, whoa. I mean, he was doing the deep dive of sweet Mormon history, everything. And it would be like one question and then like a 45-minute answer, and I'd be like, okay.
And we passed that over to
Mr.
our
Quinn, D. Michael, can you say all of that, but in 2 sentences? And be like, oh boy.
20 minutes later.
And then it was like, we'd get like a 5-minute answer. Great.
He's so
Can you
smart.
sum that up in about 25 seconds?
So we just ended up using audio visual.
So hard.
But it was great. But it was so good. It's like, man, we should just do the D. Michael Quinn.
I'm going to ask you
series.
about the outtakes in a bit. Okay. Anything else about the actual forgeries before?
No, I mean, we were able to touch base on just some of the ways Mark forged these documents. And I wish we could go deeper into how he did it and the ways he did it and the means he did it, because it was genius in his construction of, well, first his planning of it. You know, is this a document that I can sell? His research was unbelievable, and he was able to get and go into the church history libraries to find the research out. But also just, I mean, it's I've said this before, is like, you know, the George Washington signature is the most forged signature in history. Like, there are George Washingtons floating around. I have like 12 of them. I don't. But Mark wouldn't just forge a signature like some people do. He'd forge entire letters, Emily Dickinson poems. He'd do printing press. He'd do currency. He'd photographs. His range was unbelievable.
He was just loaded with Deseret currency.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Deseret currency was odd.
His own cash.
The Spanish
he could
fork
roll into
notes.
ZCMI with that now. Buy a pair of Gerbeau jeans. Anyway, keep going.
But he just like, currency was amazing. Like, he just used Al Rust, unfortunately, as like his ATM. He'd quite literally print money, because the currency that he made, the Deseret or the Spanish fork notes, were so simple. And he just figured out how to make them and make them good. He'd take them to Al Rust, and poor old dear Al Rust would give him $500, you know, for each one. But Mark was brilliant, and not just like, so one thing he did, and there's so many things that Mark did. It wasn't just that he would forge something. He'd create a story around it. And we all want to know stories. You know, he'd forge some currency, and what he did is he found an old envelope, and he put them in an envelope, and like it was stashed away, and that's how he sold those currency. Not just like pieces, but how he found it. One thing he did, he bought an Al Capone photograph, a signed Al Capone photograph from Brent Ashworth, paid like $50 for it. Well, then he took it to New York, and this was early, I think it was 82. He took it to New York, walked into a shop and goes, golly, look what I found at a garage sale. And literally said, I found it at a garage sale. Sold it for $4,200. Ted Koppel talked about it on the nightly news that night. It was national news. And Brent Ashworth called him and was like, dude, you didn't find this at a garage sale. I sold it to you. And Mark was like, well, you know, it's a good story. And it is a good story. And that's the kind of thing Mark would do. You know, he wouldn't just find a letter. He'd find one small thing he did. Like, he forged an Emily Dickinson poem, which in and of itself is remarkable, that fooled experts. And he used the right paper, he used the right ink, he used the right handwriting style. And he in a letter he wrote to somebody about that, he said that he spent 2 hours reading her poetry, and he, quote, found her muse, which, you know, as an artist, like to hear that word, that Mark literally found another artist's muse and borrowed that muse. And if you want to hear, you know, a muse is an interesting thing, but he borrowed that muse so that he could write her in her style. And he forged this poem, but what he did that was genius is on the back of it, he wrote Aunt Emily in pencil. So it had everyone spinning when they found this document. Who did he write it for? Was it his cousin? Was it his sister? Who did he write this lost poem for? And that's the completeness of Mark. It wasn't just the poem he wrote. It was the touches. It was the elements of just like, you know, when he forged the Oath of a Freeman, on the back he wrote in different pen with different ink, later, Oath of a Freeman, like somebody had filed it away that way. You know, so he was so good at finding the beginning, the middle, and the end of these stories or these documents and creating a story around them. I found this in a basement. I found this looking through old letters, when in fact he was just making the damn thing in his basement.
Beautiful.
Half diggity dog.
I was just regarding the content of the Mormon-related forgeries. I think it's important to note something you guys have already kind of noted. With the Joseph Smith III letter, people already knew that Joseph Smith Jr. had designated his son as his successor. So he wasn't like creating stuff out of whole cloth to embarrass the church. Pretty much everything he was doing, even the salamander letter, was based on a reference to a toad. So like toad, salamander. So it feel the Anthon, you know, stuff was there. There were already some characters. It seems like in other words, he didn't really have to build the story any. He was just trying to kind of create documents that reflected the actual story, but just with documents that weren't in existence yet. Is that fair to say?
No, it all fit into the history.
Yeah.
Like it all fit into the history. So it's like it was, you know, they were all substantiated on some level by
Yeah.
what was out there. And it's funny, you read like No Man Knows My History, and there's all, you know, the affidavits that mention a white toad. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I'm going to make it a salamander, spice things up. I mean, so it's like it all had historical context that would work, even if it was like screwy.
Yeah. Fawn Brody's the OG, isn't she?
She's good. It's a good book.
That book.
It's a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is a question that may be uncomfortable, maybe not, but just say what you want to say about it or not. For me, one of the biggest questions about this whole thing, other than Hofmann's motivation, was there a cover-up by church leaders? And if so, you know, how problematic, how problematic was Gordon B. Hinckley's behavior with the Josiah Stoll letter, Dallin H. Oakes's responses in 85 and 87. There's a really good Radio Free Mormon Bill Reel episode that talked about this last week. But some would want to say that the church was fully transparent. And others would want to say this is like the smoking gun example of the brethren, you know, buying up documents so that they could hide them and mislead the members and fool them and then lying about it. Where did each of you come down on that question?
I think everybody reacted to these documents differently, right? I think that there were some church leaders that were like, hey, let's get it. Let's try and research it, understand a historical context before we like take it out into the real world and present it. And then, you know, other people, I think, you know, because I know for a fact that there were bishops, stake presidents that were like, oh gosh, how do we find our own responses to it, right? Just beyond what was happening in Salt Lake City. And it was like, well, golly, I think the French word for salamanders is spirit, or, you know, or whatever kind of like methods that people could spin to kind of understand it, or whatever kind of mental gymnastics they had to do. But I think, yeah, with these early documents, it was like, yeah, let's buy it. These were private transactions at large, like they weren't public. And so without question, that looks like, oh man, they're buying it so they can throw it in a vault and not have to talk about it and not have to address it. So yeah, that absolutely looks super shady. And I don't doubt on some level that it was. But at the same time, their response is like, gosh, we want authenticators to look at it to make sure it's this, you know, and have historians look at it forensically, see if it checks out before we, without, you know, it's like Hinckley was trying to figure out, I think, how to present the content of it to the church. I mean, he talks about it in his book. People close to him talk about it. It was a tough friggin' thing, because it's like, man, this is the founding story of our faith, and now it's a lizard. I mean, not a lizard, an amphibian, a white salamander. It's like, holy dang, what do you do? So of course you're going to be like, geez, this is a complete rebranding. What, you know what I mean? Like what, you know, but it's interesting now. It's like, okay, you've got like the whole translation and the seer stone and the hat. That's different than like, you know, just like a little curtain between Oliver Cowdery and Joseph as he's just like reading off the plates, right? And now they're kind of trying to own that with the essays, and, you know, the artwork hasn't changed a lot, but, you know, it's they're just trying to make it palatable, I think.
I'll come to you, Tyler. I was just going to say that people have to understand at the time, for example, right now, anyone who's, you know, most active believing Mormons know nothing about any of this stuff still, like 95%. Sure. But there is a 5% now that have heard about the essays and that know about New Mormon history.
Right.
But what the people who are living now who weren't around back then don't realize is in the early 80s, the church was saying there was no treasure digging. The church was saying there was no folk magic. That was all, you know, no seer stone in a hat. Joseph Fielding Smith and Bruce R. McConkie and others were on the record as saying that's a lie. There's no peepstone. There's no hat. And of course, we know that Joseph Fielding Smith had ripped out the pages of Joseph Smith's 1832 journal that had a first vision account that was inconvenient because it only had the Lord visiting instead of God and Jesus. And it didn't say anything about starting a church. And so, you know, from the 19 teens and 20s to the early 1980s, the church I think you can make the argument they were intentionally hiding stuff. And the stuff that Mark Hofmann brings out touches on all those things to sort of say, it's almost like he's saying, Mormon Church, you are going to stop hiding stuff from the members and lying to them. And I'm going to help prompt it, not by creating documents that lie, but by creating documents that focus people's direction on the ways the church is misleading people.
Sure. And ultimately it's like that whole push, you see, it's cultural assimilation. They don't want to be like the weird bearded polygamous dudes in the mountains of Utah anymore. It's like, man, we want to be Americans. You know what I mean? It was this big push, I think, to really assimilate themselves culturally to the nation and not be the isolated weirdos in the mountains anymore. You know? And so I can see anything that didn't fit within this attempt to be seen as just another group of Christians doing their thing out in the Intermountain West. It's like, that's kind of, so all of these things, when you look at it, it's like, oh boy, folk magic, dang it, we gotta, you know what I mean? We just, you know, we want to be normal. And so, I mean, for like
and we don't want people to lose their faith.
We don't want people to lose their faith.
I mean, they're a big business. Every big business has secrets, you know, every single one of them does. And I do think they hid documents. I do think they tried to keep the Salamander letter quiet. And it's only because Mark leaked it to the LA Times. They did keep the Stoll letter quiet. They put
Hinckley
it in the vault.
bought it personally.
He not from his own check, but he wrote a check. He went and got the checkbook and wrote it himself. And as Mark Hofmann said, and I found, you know, in his testimony, which I have here, Exhibit A, can you put rustling of paper? Like I'm trying, thank you, that's good. But, you know, he when he took it to him, he took the Stoll letter in and he took it to Hinckley's office and it sold. And he said that they were the only ones that knew about it. And Mark said that there were 3 meetings. Hinckley gave him a check for $15,000. And supposedly, and this is from the mouth of Mark, he handed it to Francis Gibbons with instructions to put it in the vault. And Mark had instructions not to talk about it. But Mark, you know, had kept a Xerox copy, even though he told Hinckley he didn't. So I do believe that the church was trying to hide it. And whether they were, as they say, we're going to look at it before we release it. But Mark always played that game where he would, you know, keep a Xerox copy or he'd try to, you know, leak it to someone else for that reason. And who knows what else he sold. I do, you know, one thing that we always get is this whole, like, you know, you see these amazing photos of the first presidency looking at the Anthon transcript. And we have that photo in the film. And everyone says, like, how could these prophets, seers, and revelators not see this? And there is something to be said for that. I mean, they were conned, they were duped, and they should possibly know better. You know, me, I don't know, and my faith was lost a long time ago, so I'm not the expert, but I don't know if prophecy works that way myself. You know, if they knew that, they'd be able to tell you, you know, who's going to win the game tonight. What I do think they did is they lied, and I do think the first presidency deceived in many aspects about being asked, did you have this? And saying no. Do you keep records of this? And for Hinckley to say, no, I don't keep records of Mark Hofmann visiting was bullshit. And he told the investigators, I do not keep records. When later, a few days later, they had those records. They literally, and the church keeps records of everything. I have the records of Mark's visiting. I have his parking pass, a copy of his parking pass. So even after that, they were trying to deceive a little bit and keep some secrets. So, you know, I'm not going to say someone lied or someone didn't lie or someone should have had power of discernment. I don't know that. They were conned by one of the greatest con men of all time, Mark. And they were dunked on by Michael Jordan, and there's not a lot of shame in that because a lot of people were conned by him. What I do know is that they've, since that time, come clean. And in Turley's book, to their credit, they list every single document that they bought. And there were hundreds of documents that they bought from Mark Hofmann. Many of them were small little, you know, financial records and history records from a library that Mark found. They were meaningless for the most part. Some of them were incredibly damning. But but they were there. So I don't know. You can pick a side and say they should have seen this because people died, or you can just say they were conned and they were upfront. I think there's a gray area all around.
Yeah.
Yeah. That part was stunning to me when Hinckley said, "We don't keep record. I didn't keep records of my time with Hofmann." I was like,
yeah, he did.
And then Oakes later, I think it's in '87, and even later, the church has made statements like, "We've never hid anything, and we're as honest as we know how to be," and that's frustrating. But again, they neither seek nor request apologies, right? So that's hard.
I mean, it's also difficult when you're in the middle of this was 2 days after people were killed.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what was happening. For them, it was a surprise that Steve Christensen was going to meet with him that day, that Alvin Russ thought he was going to meet with him, that Mark was going to meet with him. They didn't know all the details. And in many aspects, the best thing when you're that close legally from a murder is just to say, I don't know at this point.
Sure.
Let's figure all this out.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I got this really sad email. Was there anything else you want to say about that, Jared?
No.
Okay.
That's great.
I got this really sad email from a family member of Steve Christensen. I'll just say that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, "John, I saw how excited you are about this documentary coming out, and I just want you to know, I loved my dad, and to see you gleefully getting all excited about it. I just want you to remember people died about this." And I felt torn. It's like, okay, on the one hand, people died. That's horrendous. Mm-hmm. And there's so many victims. On the other hand, this is a cool documentary. It's super exciting. Mm-hmm. And to even make it worse, sometimes it's hilarious. Some of the stuff like the guy with the priesthood oil blessing Hofmann, or even Shannon Flynn.
Sure.
It's so many emotions. So anyway, you guys talk about that and talk about the bombings, because we should be respectful and talk about the bombings.
Yeah. I mean, these are two hugely beloved people in the community. I mean, everybody that knew Steve Christensen and knew Kathy Sheets, it's like these people were senselessly murdered by Hofmann. And you hear from Hoffman's own mouth that he just, he didn't care who the Kathy Sheets bomb killed, if it was a child or a dog or whoever. He was so callous and heartless. And, specifically with that bombing with Steve, it was kind of vengeful and protecting. There was the sense that Steve was onto him. And because Steve had been kind of put in charge unofficially or officially by the church to help secure the McClellan collection, there were, Hofmann was soliciting money he told a bunch of different people, like, yeah, give me X amount of money and you can have the McClellan collection and then you'll be able to sell it to the church for X amount. He did that with Al Rust. He did that there were other people, and maybe even more that we don't know about, that had given him money for the McClellan collection. And the church was one of them. And so you've got, but Steve, again, I think saw through Hofmann's BS and was calling him out on it. And even his widow, Terry Christensen, says, yeah, I think Steve was telling him, you got to pay up, you got to give us the money back. If you're not going to deliver the McClellan collection, you've got to give us the money back. And so all of those things were just converging on that day. And anyway, so that aside, we wanted to be so respectful to the family. I know that none of them have fully, the children that were raised without a father, both, or a mother, with the Sheets family and the Christensen family. It's like, my father died at age 33, and I'm still,
his age 33, not yours.
Sorry. My personal father died of cancer
when
at 33.
He was 33, not when you were 33.
No. Yeah, when he was 33, I was 8 years old.
Right.
When he passed away.
Exactly.
And so my mom remarried shortly thereafter, but me and my brothers, we still haven't fully recovered of having grown up without our father, right? Like knowing what lessons or experiences we might have had with him. So I identify big time with what the Christensens, went through on some level. And there were photos, crime scene photos of him laying there, some that were very, very graphic and difficult. And we there's no way we were going to use those in the film. But we did have shots of his, his legs, and you needed to see what this evil man had done on some level for it to have an impact. And I know I've heard through, I don't think the Christensen family had ever seen that. And I'm so heartbroken finding that out after the fact, and how difficult that must have been. But we wanted there to people understand what an incredible person Steve was. And even just hearing Brett Metcalf in the interview talk about him, and just what an incredible man he was, and still being emotional about it and feeling responsible for it on some level, that he had introduced Steve to Mark. And it's like,
how do you get over that? How do you recover from that?
Yeah, how do you recover from that?
It's there's still so much pain for Mark Hofmann. It's palatable in this city, and it's evident in the film. And somebody said this to me, that it's amazing how many grown men were vulnerable in this film, and they opened up, and they showed their pain. And part of that pain is the death of Kathy Sheets and Steve Christensen. And to the families of them, I genuinely say, I'm sorry. I really am. I'm sorry that this drudged up pain for them, and it drudged up pain for a lot of people. And I'm sorry that we couldn't shield the world from what had happened. But consequently, I talked to one of them, and I said, my father died about 1.5 years ago, and he was a good man. He was a good man. He died of leukemia, and he was a really good man. And I said, you have a love letter in many ways to your father. There's so many people who spoke so well of him, and we put that in the film, and that was a conscious choice to show the kind of monster that Mark was, to do this. Because we were always walking that line with this film of a flawed protagonist. Because we, in some aspects, want to revere Mark for the craftsman he was, that he pulled the wool over so many people's eyes and did it in such a unique way. And we wanted to balance that. And so part of the balance was just to show the photos in their small aspects, but also to show the pain that he caused and still caused. And unfortunately, Kathy Sheets is a footnote in the film, and I'm sorry that we couldn't go more into her as a wonderful human being. She wasn't as much a story as Steve Christensen was. Steve Christensen was elemental to the story of Mark Hofmann and the Salamander Letter. Kathy Sheets was an innocent bystander, for God's sakes. She just happened to be going on a walk and picked up a package that was in front of her house, which shows even more so the monster that Mark Hofmann was. So I wish there weren't victims involved in true crime, and there are, and many other true crime series go a lot deeper than we did. They show horrific scenes of death and crime, and we have those horrible photos, and I have them, and they will never, ever, ever be seen. I have them, and no one else does, for the most part, that I know of these horrific crime scene photos that will be locked away, and no one will see them. So.
Yeah.
So our sincere love and condolences to the Sheets family, the Christensen family, and all the victims.
Yep.
Dory, everyone. So many victims.
Yep.
And we don't want to trivialize that at all. So thank you for responding to that. So really quickly, the third bomb. Do you guys want to just quickly address your thoughts on who that was for?
We've talked about this a little bit, but it's like Mark, like in many aspects, he played the long game with his forgeries, right? He was, with the Salamander Letter, establishing the handwriting of Martin Harris. So then later, hopefully, he could pull off the lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon, which he would have made a killing on. He would have made so much money, in the tens of millions, probably. But then in other aspects of his life, he was incredibly short-sighted. And obviously with money, he was horrible. He would spend it the moment he would get it. He would promise things to people and never be able to deliver. And that's ultimately what put him in the bind where he felt that his only way out was to kill people and buy time. And
because he had to shut up Steve, right?
He had to shut up Steve, I think. And but then he wanted to throw people off the trail of Steve. So the
He had to
Kathy
get
Sheets
out of the
bomb,
McClellan promises.
he had to get out of he had to get out of that because he didn't. It was such a vast collection that had been promised to people, and I don't think he was anywhere even close to delivering on that. So that he was scheduled to meet with Brent Ashworth that day. He easily could have met with Al Rust. He easily could have met with Brent Metcalf.
He had lunch. He was supposed to have lunch with Brent.
Brent. So there were a number of people on the short list that we think that bomb could have been intended for. But he parked, behind the Desert Gym, which is, just north of what is now the LES Church Conference Center. And it's on a hill. All of his bombs were activated where if you would tip them, right, the connection
Mercury
would be made.
switch kind of thing.
It was a mercury switch, exactly. And blow it up. But he was in first of all, his story was that he was in the car, the door was closed, and it blew up. Well, if that would have happened, it would have killed him. Mm-hmm. He was blown across the street, right? So it's like, I think that he had intended to blow up his car and destroy the McClellan collection, but something went wrong, I think, where he timed it wrong and just got blown. I mean, he literally flew across the street. They found him kind of where you see in the film. He's laying on this little grass stretch next to the sidewalk. And that's where he was found and given the blessing and all that stuff. So I don't know if he had intended to actually kill himself. I mean, I think if it doesn't add up.
He says he wanted to kill himself.
He says he wanted to.
I don't think he had the guts to do that.
Right.
I don't think he had the
He was
guts
smart
to do
enough
it.
to know if I really want to do it, keep the door closed.
So I think he probably wanted, it might have been targeted for Brent Ashworth. And in recovering fragments from the bomb, they found a brown paper and all they found was an R, a letter R, a capital letter R, but all of his the words he wrote on the bombs were capitals. And that could have been for Rust, could have been for Brent Ashworth, could have been for Brent Metcalf.
They all got R's in their names, right?
Yeah. So I think it might have been for Brent Ashworth, myself. But I think maybe when he didn't show, he said, okay, I'm going to... the trunk was full of old documents. That was supposedly the McClellan collection. He wanted the car to blow up, burn these documents. I think he wanted it to blow up in front of him or near him so that he could say, oh my God, they're after me, and skip town. There's one part of the story, the vast saga of Mark Hofmann, that we couldn't go into, which is we tried. We had a cut of it. Like a few days before the bombings, he owed people to the tunes of $1.5 million.
Whoa.
And in fact, I have this amazing record of all the people he owed. And he actually owed like $15,000 to the cell phone company because he had this big brick cell phone, which $15,000, that was like, yeah, every call was like $10 you had to spend. That's maybe worthy of a bombing. But there was a day when like someone demanded their money, a guy named Thomas Wilding, who'd given him a lot of money, and he'd promised these documents he couldn't. And there was a guy who had lost his hand in a lumberjack accident or a farming accident. And he took all the from Idaho. He took all the money and he gave it to Mark Hofmann as this investment. And Mark a lot of times was very good at it. People would give him money and say, "I've got a lead on this document. I'm going to find it," and they'd get their money back.
Ponzi.
And, yeah, in some ways, and a lot of times they were real documents. A lot of times he created them. But, they were making their money, and he owed these people money, and they showed up at his house and they in the morning, 6 a.m., and he said, "I will find your money." And the whole day they followed him around, and he went from person to person, to bank, to Kurt Bench, to Al Rust, all these people trying to get money to pay these people off. And at the end of the day, they didn't give him money, and the one-armed lumberjack punched Mark Hofmann in the face. So that's this crazy-ass story that we couldn't go into.
That would have been the best reenactment of all time. Just didn't have the budge.
You could have played the lumberjack, Jared.
Right. But this showed how desperate Mark was at the time. So if the bomb would have gone off, he could have skipped town. And I think, he had wires sticking out of the bomb. And when he connected those two wires, it connected the battery to the mercury switch. And when tipped, it went off. I hope I'm not telling too many people how to make bombs. But the slant of the hill, I think he connected those wires hoping that maybe the car would tip or something, or someone else would find it, and it blew him out of the car.
So intended for someone else, likely.
I think so. But in a way, like he's being targeted.
Right. Right. That's important.
So I'm skipping town.
Oh, that's good.
Right.
That's good. One of the, Shannon Flynn was obviously a big star. And I was really surprised because there's this great podcaster named Rick Bennett who's got a YouTube channel called Gospel Tangents. Shout out to Rick. He interviews Shannon Flynn. Totally different Shannon Flynn than the Shannon Flynn you guys got, by the way.
When was the interview? Was it before the film?
Yeah, prior.
Yeah. Different guy. But
Well
anyway,
before. Good 2 or 3 years
Shannon
before.
Flynn was much more theatrical for you guys than he was for Rick. I'm just, maybe he was just excited. But here's what I want to say. Sometimes the reactions are really uncharitable. And the one question I wanted to ask you guys is, there were people who, I'm going to just say, this is a really serious accusation, but there were people that wanted to kind of find accomplices. And the two that popped up for me in terms of what I heard from others were Shannon Flynn as a potential total just unfair, mean-spirited,
and Lynn Jacobs,
irresponsible speculation. And then Lynn Jacobs, who the film actually never is able to talk to, probably because you just didn't have enough time. But Sandra Tanner mentioned him. Do you guys want to talk about potential accomplices and anything you say about Lynn Jacobs and or Shannon as the people many listeners most want to?
Sure. About Lynn. I mean, look, Shannon, he was homies with Mark. They worked together for like the last 2 years of Mark's runs, like 84, 85 is when Shannon really started working for Mark full time. So he was a part of all their document deals. Shannon would like pack heat when he'd like fly to New York. Like we literally, I wish we could have put it in the film, but we've got another funny little reenactment where they're like in a dumpy hotel room and Shannon's like spinning, the whatever on his the chamber on his 6-shooter and then puts it in, throws it in a briefcase, and then they clasp hands like bros.
I'll show you. But I have a cop.
But it's. I mean, so it's like that's the world. They were kind of peas in a pod. I mean, Shannon was definitely into the soldier of fortune stuff, into guns and Uzi. And the Uzi stuff, and they would just go to the desert like a couple of Boy Scouts and blow stuff up and just be stupid. And so like Shannon, I mean, look, during the course of the interview, I mean, there were times, first of all, Shannon's body language, he's, I think, very uncomfortable about talking about some of this stuff. And so he twitches and kind of moves nervously, and it comes off super suspicious, like he was an accomplice, right?
And by the way, he showed up in that 3-piece suit. I've heard people like, I can't believe the filmmakers dressed him up like that. Like we did that. We didn't put a shirt on him the same way we didn't put a shirt on Ken Sanders. They came as they are, as the kind of people we wanted them to be.
Somebody on social media said, the MVP of Murder Among the Mormons is this dude's shirt buttons, and it was Ken Sanders.
Yeah, it's an essential worker. Is what he should get a vaccine.
Ken is amazing. But I think Shannon, and it's like because they had spent so much time doing these activities together, going and shooting guns, blowing stuff up in the desert. Like the blast caps apparently that were used for some of the bombs Shannon had bought from like somewhere in southern Utah, giving them to Mark ages ago. But it was normal. It was like, oh, we're going out to blow up big old firecrackers and be pyros like a couple of 14-year-olds.
Well, imagine being 20 years old and you're in your 20s and you're into that stuff. Like you're into soldier of fortune stuff. And all of a sudden,
early 80s.
You're Shannon Flynn and you're carrying guns. You're going to New York with literally suitcases full of cash. You're flying to South America to sell a document. You're doing back-end midnight deals. You're sitting in a fancy restaurant in New York eating and drinking too much. I did not drink. Just so you know, I did no drinking, as he said. I mean, what a life. These kids from Utah, like dealing and wheeling and playing like James Bond. That's amazing. Right. He must have felt.
And it's like ultimately the investigators were so amazing and so good at what they did. It's like they dug deeper than anyone has. Like at the time, you got Michael George, you've got Stott, Ken Farnsworth. Ken had passed away. Jerry D'Elia, who's in the film. All these guys, like they, Shannon was super suspicious to him, but ultimately, he was exonerated. He didn't, he was not an accomplice to Mark, and we trust that. But again, body language, people, he looks suspicious at times in the film, but I don't think he had anything to do with it.
You don't think he knew? You don't think Shannon knew?
No, I do not.
He says it. I mean, he says in the film, he
I don't think
point
he knew
blank
at all.
says, I didn't want to know. So maybe he had hints of it, but I don't think he looked deep enough.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think he was too swept up in the fun he was having.
Yeah.
With the lifestyle.
Yeah.
But Lynn Jacobs.
Lynn Jacobs was an associate of Mark, and Lynn Jacobs lived here in Salt Lake in the mid '80s, and he was he was openly gay, which must have been incredibly difficult to be openly gay in Salt Lake City in the '80s. He was a genius. He went to Harvard, and he worked with Mark Hofmann closely. And in fact, it was Lynn Jacobs who initially, Mark found the salamander letter, supposedly, gave it to Lynn, and Lynn took that into the church to sell. So because Mark said, I'm finding too many documents, it's getting suspicious. There's two speculations. One is that Mark was a homosexual, and Lynn was his secret partner. And two was that Lynn knew. Lynn Jacobs passed away from AIDS. I don't remember when. I think it was the late 80s. So we weren't able to talk to him, obviously, and there's very little, there's no audio, there's very few pictures of Lynn. We just don't have much. So unfortunately, we just couldn't go into him in the documentary. He was also a brilliant document restorer. Lynn was able to fix documents and piece them together. So look, if anyone did know, it was Lynn Jacobs. That doesn't mean he did. As for the homosexuality, which I'll be honest, I have had dozens and dozens of questions. Was Mark gay? I asked as many people as I could whether he was or not, including people like Justin Schiller, who, him and his partner are homosexuals and would hang out with Mark. First off, it doesn't matter. I don't care if Mark was or not, but he will, and again, we'll never know. I don't think it matters, but everyone said no, he wasn't.
Yeah.
However,
close to him. Yeah,
Mark also kept some other secrets, so who knows?
Right. Brilliant. Okay, so at the end of the day, were there heroes and any, were there heroes that you guys want to just say these people were heroes to me? That come out of the story.
Al Rust for me. All the investigators, I think, were heroes. George Throckmorton, Bill Flynn. I mean, they really kind of broke the case wide open when, in the face of these huge institutions whose reputations were on the line, they just came in with some good old-fashioned science and discovered that these were forgeries, and that changed everything. And then when the investigators were able to, find out that Hofmann had been making these plates to do the Oath of a Freeman, it's like it was such an incredible team of smart people that worked tirelessly to really break it open. But I think people that openly forgave Mark after the fact, like Al Rust, who was completely devastated and ruined financially. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing to me. And Matt Christensen too, the father of Steve Christensen. The stories that we heard, one that we didn't have time for. The Desert News wrote an article about how he, when Mark Hofmann's children were grown and Dory's like a single mom, kind of destitute a lot of the time, Matt Christensen stepped in when her oldest son wanted to go on a mission and said, I will help provide things that you need to go. And that's just amazing. But also...
So he pays for the son of his son's murderer to go on a mission.
Yeah. And then another one, and this is one that Randy Rigby told us that we didn't have time for, but in the hearing for Hofmann, when the investigators and prosecutors were laying out their case against Mark, just horrible time for Mark Hofmann's family, who would all along, Hofmann's dad and mom had believed that he was innocent and that these allegations were false. But when it came to light, when the evidence was so damning that there was no question that Mark was guilty, like Matt Christensen leaned over to Hofmann's dad and said, "Hey, I just want you to know that my family holds no ill will against you or your family. We love you. You know, we forgive, you know, what has been done." And it's like, wow, that was, I mean, Randy Brigby could barely get through telling that story. We were all bawling as he told it. And it was just like, wow, these are just incredible people that were willing to kind of forgive and try and heal and move on from it. But yeah.
You know, that story about how Matt Christensen paid for Mark Hofmann's son to go on a mission, you know, and everyone says that's, and it is it's a wonderful story, and it shows the forgiveness and the amazement of Utah. I told that story to my therapist, and he goes, yeah, well, you could also look at it as, you took my son, I'm going to take yours. So not to be that, you know, negative about it, but you know,
wow, that's a negative therapist.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. It explains a bit about me.
No.
That's dark.
But one person who I think is amazing in this is Alvin Rust, who is Salt of the Earth. He's a great human being, and he just loved collecting these coins and loved when Mark came in. And he said, I treated him like a son, and he betrayed me. Which, for those who know the story of Al Rust and the Utah story of his son, Galen Rust, is kind of heartbreaking as well. And he openly cried about that. He said, I had one man who treated me as a son betray me, and a real son betray me. And if people who know Galen Rust, his son, involved in a large-scale Ponzi scheme, a silver dealing scheme. Here's a little inside story that I've never told anyone publicly. I went in to visit Galen Rust, and I talked to him, and I said, I want to interview you, because Galen Rust had his own story with Mark. He went to New York with Mark to retrieve the McClellan collection. I went and talked to Galen, and he took me in his office, and we talked for about an hour, and he said, I don't want you to make this documentary. I don't want you to make it. Every time this story comes up, it causes a lot of pain, which I agree with. And then he said, and of course, Galen Rust had millions of dollars, and he was interested in the arts and student funding. And he said, Tyler, how much have you put into this documentary? And I was relatively early at the time in making it. And I said, I've got about $30,000 into the making of this film so far. And he said, how about I give you $50,000 not to make it, and I'll give you $1 million to make a documentary about how important music is to students. And that's a sizable amount of money. I went to the dentist, and I sat in right after I went to the dentist, I sat in the dentist chair, and I sat there for an hour and a half just thinking about it. $50,000 just right back to me, and $1 million to make a film. And by the end of it, I said, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. I would regret the rest of my life if I took a payoff to not make the story that I want to make. So I got in my car, and I was driving, and I got a call from Galen, and he said, Tyler, I did my research. You're a great filmmaker. I talked to a number of people, and you're going to make this film anyways. So rather than me trying to not have you make it, I'm going to give you the money to make it. And you're going to come into my studio. I'm going to outfit you. I'm going to give you all the money to make this documentary. And I initially that was also interesting as well. Of course, at the time I didn't have any funding for the film. And I went down that road for a while. Unfortunately, it didn't materialize, and that's good, because the FBI eventually raided his studio and took all of the hard drives and took everything. I do believe, in my opinion, that Galen was trying to hide something there too.
This is before it broke, that all that happened.
Oh yeah, this is before it broke, of course.
Before the whole scandal.
Yeah. I think Galen, in my opinion, I think Galen knowingly forged or sold Mark Hofmann forgeries after Mark Hofmann was convicted, including coins. And Galen told me, Mark Hofmann never forged coins. He never forged coins. He never forged coins. And the lady doth protest way too much when he was telling me, I never sold Mark Hofmann forgeries. I never sold coins at Mark Hofmann's, which I genuinely believe he did, and he may have been trying to hide that. He took over the business from Al, and Al told us, I sold him the business, and I regret it, because he didn't have the love of documents that Al Rust had. Al loved these coins. Galen just treated him as merchandise and sold them. So there's a little inside baseball that may have gone way too deep.
Wow, I didn't know that story.
Yeah, you hadn't come on yet,
story.
Actually, at the time. You weren't a part of it.
Epic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, last two. You guys have already said you intentionally wanted people to connect their own dots. Last two questions about the Mormon Church. Then I want to end by just asking you a couple questions about the doc, its reception, people's reaction to it, and we'll get you out of here. The two questions that I would want to ask you about the church to end, and it's the type of thing that people really, especially people who have felt hurt by the church, betrayed by the church, etc. The two things that they want to do are make parallels between Joseph Smith and Mark Hofmann. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that they want to do is they want to say, if the church hadn't had a history of not being honest about its history, if the church hadn't have had a history of buying up documents, if the church hadn't have had a history of using front people to be their purchasers so that they wouldn't have to be the ones purchasing to then hide it and then donating the documents, so that then these deaths wouldn't have happened. The whole Mark Hofmann wouldn't have even had a reason to become a con man in this way, because the church would have been fully transparent in its history, and then Steve Christensen wouldn't have been put in harm's way. I know that's a lot of sort of like hindsight 2020 stuff, and I want to just tell you guys, if you guys just want to say, let the people connect their own dots, that's a fine answer for me, but I would feel bad if I didn't at least ask you if there's anything you want to say about either of those questions.
I just don't think anybody could have done anything to anticipate the evil, premeditated murder, in killing that Hofmann, pulled off. In hindsight, it's easy to go, and kind of point fingers, but it seems like the mess that he'd gotten himself into, he'd already put it in his own head that people would have to die. And it's a mess that he created. And I just don't think it's smart to kind of like look back and give blame to people. I mean, you look at Brent Metcalf, who feels totally responsible for having introduced Steve to Mark Hofmann. And I'm sure that people at the church feel horrible about asking Steve Christensen to kind of be the go-between with the documents. It's like there's so much pain and guilt, I think, that people have looking at it. But again, this was all created by Mark Hofmann. Like, this whole mess was created by him. And to try and point blame anywhere other than where it deserves to be is just a mistake. So, yeah.
We had to set up the context and the setting in which Mark Hofmann was able to thrive, and he was able to thrive. His ballpark, his short right porch in Yankee Field was the Mormon Church and the faith and the people within the community, and their affinity for one another and their trust for people who were also of their same faith, in which Mark utilized that. B, the love of history that the Mormon faith and the Mormon historians had in this need to collect their history. Also the money that, a lot of active Mormons have and the Mormon faith has. He was able to really utilize those to his advantage. Also, the Mormon faith has a history of treasure. They find treasure and they look for treasure. And Joseph Smith was a treasure digger. I'm sorry, he was. He looked for treasure. It's just fact. So this was the setting in which Mark was able to place himself in, which allowed him to thrive. Of course, he also utilized those same things in the international and national stage with historical documents. Was the church responsible? I don't know. My opinion, I have lost my faith. God and angel did not appear to a young boy in the woods. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and there is none. I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. And Mark didn't buy it, obviously. And I'm not putting myself on the level of Mark and what he did. There are crazy stories within the Mormon faith. Me personally, I'm sorry, man. Polygamy, I'm getting off on a tangent, but no man needs 37 wives. And if there was a hardware store where a man married a 14-year-old girl and had 37 wives, I wouldn't go to that store, and most people wouldn't. But yet there's a statue of that man just up the road. So I don't buy these things. I don't believe them. And Mark didn't believe them, and he utilized that. And in some ways, those stories may have needed to be outed. And if Mark Hofmann, through his connivery and evilness and wicked ways, was able to allow the church to open their history a little bit more and reveal the fact that we have these skeletons in their closet, there is something to be commended for that. He achieved his purpose in a horrible, horrific way, and allowed some secrets that needed to be told, because there are people out there who, believe this. And that's great. I have no problem with them. If it makes them happy, that's wonderful. I have no problem with that. I really don't. I have no ill will and want to pull anyone out of the church. I just don't. It's just not for me. So Mark had his agenda and he accomplished it. If Mark had probably just said, at some point, you know what? When he was in trouble and he owed people millions of dollars, if he would have just said, the jig is up, guys. I'm a forger. I'm a fraud. He probably would have done 10 years, and now he'd be working for the FBI. He'd pull a Frank Abagnale, catch me if you can. But instead, he planted 2 bombs and killed 2 innocent people and, cost the state millions of dollars and a lot of, the pain he did, the things he did. There was a store here in Salt Lake, and now I'm really get off, but there was a store here in Salt Lake called the Cosmic Airplane, right? And it was the cool shop in Salt Lake. It was the head shop. It was where you got crazy magazines. Ken Sanders had his store. That was the early birth of that store. But they also, the owner of that, bought Hofmann forgeries. And when they were found to be forgeries, he had to buy them back, ultimately closing down the coolest store in Salt Lake City. So the effects of Mark, the fingers of Mark, were far-reaching. The damage he did was far-reaching, and the damage he did was to the Mormon Church. The damage he did was to people's faith. The damage he did was to people's lives. And many of those things, most of those things can never be brought back.
So dark. What have been the most encouraging, touching, heartwarming reactions? I mean, tens of millions of viewers, number 2 Netflix, movie in the world. Huge positive success. You guys have already said. What have been the most heartwarming, and if you want to also share the most disappointing responses to the documentary?
I think, it's funny going into it. I think the perception of the story, the title, Murder Among the Mormons, I had a lot of concern and sleepless nights just about the perception within the community.
Did you pick the title or did Netflix? Or
no. I mean, it was Netflix wanted us to change it from the Salamander from the beginning.
It was going to be the Salamander?
Yeah, it was going to be the Salamander. That was a working title.
Then we toyed with the Salamander Murders, which they were like,
and then they saw the clip that we had, piece of archival soundbite where it's like, the church in an uncomfortable spotlight as there is murder among the Mormons. And they were like, That's it. And it's just, it's a question of clarity. But anyway, all of those things, just knowing that the word Mormon's taboo now.
It didn't have
they're trying to move
murder among the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't have the same ring to it, the same alliteration.
But yeah, for me, I think, and Netflix, they cut together their own trailer, do their own marketing. And I think the perception just of the story within the community is like, oh, this is something we don't really talk about. The church could look really bad, that kind of a thing. And people had their own agenda for it too, right? What they wanted it to be, whether they wanted it to be an expose on the church or totally exonerating the church or whatever. And it was none of those things. It's like what we wanted to tell, again, was let people tell their story, the people closest to Mark. Let them tell the story. And that's where we took all of our cues from. And so I think when people saw it, for me, the most rewarding thing is people feel that when they watch it, like whether they're ex-Mormon, post-Mormon, or totally in the church, they come away with, oh, we just heard people kind of tell their story and it was fascinating. And they all take their own kind of, lessons from it without us kind of having to preach what we want. It's like, just put the story out there and let people decide for themselves what it's all about. So that's been the most fun thing. And then again, this was made for not the small community of people that know the ins and outs of this story. It was made for a global audience. And so for people to be able to watch it, and the funny thing, people that don't know anything about Mormonism or the church, all the feedback I've got is like, I had no idea it was Mark until the end of episode 2.
That was so cool.
What?
Yeah.
It's like,
you did that on purpose, right?
Yeah, we wanted to structure it that way, but the fact that it worked for people that went into it cold and didn't know jack squat was it's
that's
fun.
A real cool achievement.
Yeah. So it's cool. But anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, like, I'm proud of us. And Jared said that. He called us before it was done. He called me and he's like, dude, I'm so proud of this work. And I'm proud of it. We spent years getting a very difficult story off the ground, and we got it onto the platform that everyone essentially can watch it. And we told the story we wanted to tell for the most part. And it's fun, and it's entertaining, and it's engaging, and it makes you think. And we put levity in it because I think that was an important part of it. We didn't want it to be this gruesome, horrible true crime. We put a little, there
was that Rice Krispie treat moment. Was that an homage to Napoleon Dynamite? Be honest.
No, I don't think there's any Rice Krispies in Napoleon, but I mean, I
no,
think
the hand reaching for dessert, was
the
that?
little tinkle.
That was, yeah,
in the Celestial
because
Pursuit?
the little flourish. That was our sound man who ended up playing Shannon Flynn in the recreations, and he
John
was
May was our sound man. And when we end up casting, we're like, nobody looks like Shannon more than the dude holding the boom pole. And he was brilliant.
We got to give a shout out real quick though to our amazing team and crew. Like, I mean, Tyler's already mentioned our editors, and really, I mean, for me, making a movie in COVID, I mean, it was so bizarre. The restrictions you have with production, the fact that we were even able to shoot recreations was a miracle. But then having to work remotely was super weird. Tyler and I couldn't be in the cutting room, so we were watching cuts via Zoom. But just, our editors, our producer, Janet Gargi, Duff Rich, our producer here in town, him and his wife, Amy Rich, were just incredible pulling together the production. It was an impossible task, and they just hit it out of the park. Jonas Sappington, our production designer.
Jonas was amazing. JJ Neward, who'd been on the project from day one, much before, and she was a producer on the project.
Amazing.
And the Utah Film Commission was amazing, and we actually got a state of Utah rebate for this. Right. We were granted part of that. So,
real quick, Bianca Klein, our cinematographer, unbelievable. Sam Demke, our prop guy, was incredible. He pulled together. He had to fabricate all of the forgeries and documents into a knockout job.
And we did as much as we could. In truth, like we created Mark's workshop, his basement. We had Jonas, our production designer. We gave him some photos of the actual workshop that Mark worked in from the police records, and he created it almost exactly. My
bladder's about to explode, John.
So is mine.
So
do you want
embarrassing? I don't know if you're live streaming.
We should wrap up. You can run back.
Can I go pee?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Can I use your water bottle? Because I have to do the same thing. What's your shot? Is it here? Can I just?
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, don't worry. Grab whatever you want.
I know. I just had a big old coffee. It's like, I know. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
Where was I? I was talking about the crew. Oh yeah. So we did as much as we could. We did as much as we could to make it similar. Like we used actual plates that Mark had, Mark's actual plates. We used the cards. We got as much as we could that was real from the film. When we found the MR2, and we found the MR2 here in Utah, we searched all over the place. We found an MR2 here in West Valley. We bought it.
Was it the right color?
Yeah, totally.
That's so cool.
And it's badass. It's badass.
You still have it?
Duff Rich has it, and we blew the engine. We that thing has been around since 1986, and we took it out for a weekend and just did donuts out in the West Desert and blew the engine. But when we shot that scene where he parked the car, we shot it in the exact spot where Mark actually parked the car. So we tried to do as much as we could, and that was the sensibilities of, now that Jared's gone, I can talk about him. We tried to do, the sensibilities of Jared being a narrative filmmaker and me being a documentary filmmaker. We blended those two together, of like, I wanted to be just as authentic as possible with the documentary, and he wanted to have a little bit of fun. And so between those two,
it was great.
We kind of told a broader, wider story. But after I got my vaccine, my wonderful girlfriend, Diana Witten, who just was amazing and so wonderful in helping make this film and put it together. And, every wife should be commended for every filmmaker who spends years doing something. But we went and got our vaccine a couple weeks ago. And afterwards we went to Templin House, and we went and had a beer, and we were sitting outside, and we're sitting next to some people. And I mean, we've been quarantining like mad. And for like the first time in a year, we talked to strangers. And the dude just started talking, and he just goes, "Holy shit, have you guys seen this movie, Murder Among the Mormons? It's amazing." And Diana wanted to say it was me who did it, and I just kind of held back, and I was like, "What'd you think of it?" And for someone to like tell me to watch my own movie, just say it out there like that was so amazing to see that. The response has been great. And it's been great from my Mormon mother, who loved the film, to people in Indonesia who I read on Twitter about. And, to see that the world can see this story and to be on the biggest streaming service in the world has been remarkable.
It's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a hell of a story, man.
Yeah.
It's not just murder. Yeah, there's 2 murders, there's pipe bombs, but there's greed, and there's forgery, and there's deception, and there's
religion.
This this central casting type of investigators with sport coats and mustaches. Just like this story has everything.
Yeah.
And it ties in.
Not a lot of sex. It's the only thing you didn't know about sex, which is fine.
That's the DVD extras. We'll show you later. It's not just like, this happened in 1985 and Mark started in 1980, but this forgery and this story goes back to 1830, and it goes back even further if you talk about the amazement of the Oath of a Freeman, which that forgery, the Oath of a Freeman was Mark's Mona Lisa, and how he pulled that off and the history of it. That's the first printed document in American history.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
go.
And Mark was able to fool everyone, and the way he fooled everyone by doing that, the techniques he did to create that document was amazing. It's my turn. You're gonna roll
for it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No. I know. I promise you guys 2 hours. So, I'll ask Jared. I'll ask you first, and
great.
then when Tyler comes, I'll ask him the same question. Well, anything else you wanted to say about people's reactions or how you feel
it's
about
just been
it?
overwhelmingly positive and just
What about
fun.
believing Mormons and
especially believing Mormons? I've been kind of blown away. And again, I think there was a lot of fear and trepidation initially, like, oh, should we watch this? Is there an axe to grind? Are we going to lose our faith?
people were like, Jared's going to be excommunicated for sure with this one. He's gone,
No, but people, I think there was a lot of worry initially, but then it's like, I think the word of mouth has been amazing. I mean, it's funny just walking through my neighborhood, which is predominantly LDS, and people stopping saying, "Oh my gosh, we loved it. It was just, wow. We were surprised that it was just kind of right down the center. Like it didn't take
that's
us
a real accomplishment.
Yeah. I mean, so it's fun that it was received that way, but you had to tell both sides of the story. To be able to have a semblance of integrity with your filmmaking, it's like, yeah, we hear Sandra Tanner go, you know what? There was a great questioning in the church. How do these prophets, seers, and revelators not know that Hofmann was a fraud and that they were being duped? And this was, a very difficult thing for the church. It's like you need to be able to hear Richard Turley say, hey, God doesn't always step in. If you believe in God, like he doesn't interfere sometimes and lets people have their agency and, again, to not have Turley be able to tell his side of you know what I mean? You need to hear both and the perspective and the takeaways that everyone had after this had happened, in hindsight, like what they learned from it. So, we tried to do that, but maybe weren't as effective or whatever. But anyway.
Okay, I want to ask you guys just about future plans, future projects, and if there's ever going to be a Joseph Smith series or documentary. But I want to just have you comment on one thing. There was one thing that I really wished was in the documentary, and it's only because of my love for this couple. But I kind of felt like in my own mind that loves fantasy, that loves superheroes, I almost envisioned Gerald Tanner as kind of the arch nemesis of Mark Hofmann, maybe matched him in brilliance. And the fact, we talked a lot about discernment and integrity and prophets, seers, and revelators. This dude was able to detect the Salamander letter as a forgery a full year before anybody else, and had the integrity as an ex-Mormon and as being viewed as the world's worst, most awful, hateful, satanic anti-Mormon.
Right. You know
had
that
the
feeling,
integrity.
don't
I know a little bit about. What are you laughing at, Tyler?
Nothing. I'm just a joke guy.
Yeah. He had the integrity to say, I'd love to run with this, but I want to make sure it's accurate. And then he was willing to stand up through sending his wife out, of course, stand up to the ex-Mormon community, a lot of his peers, and say, I know you guys love this. I know you want to be spiking the football and dancing about this, but we can't do that because I don't think this document's legitimate. This is prophet, seer, revelator, and matching the brilliance, in my mind, potentially, of Mark Hofmann. I guess I would have loved that story to be memorialized. And I'm not giving you guys a hard time about it.
No. That's one that I wanted in so bad. That was fascinating. I kept harping on our editors, like, guys, we got to have this in there in episode 2. This is so fascinating. But it fell ultimately into the category of like, this only means something exactly to
12 people,
this many people that have read the books and even know who Gerald Tanner is. But for me, it was something so huge because, again, to the rest of the world, it doesn't matter because they already don't believe that Mormonism is true. It's, you know what I mean? It's just another religion. So again, it was kind of going down a rabbit hole, but I loved it just again, because I'm so fascinated with the Tanners. And it was amazing to talk to Sandra about it. And she said, you know what, Gerald saw it, read the content, and he was like, look, even though the paper checks out, the handwriting checks out, he's like, the content is too pat, is what she said. It's almost too obvious, too easy. It's patterned after anything that you could read, you know.
And Sandra wanted it to be true, which is interesting.
Yeah, they
stuck to it.
Yeah, she told that story. How they argued about that.
Yeah. So it's super, and to me, I loved it. But again, the rest of the world, it was just boring. But to us, it's like, wow, like that are versed in the history and know the history of the Tanner's relationship to the church. It's so fascinating.
It's kind of legendary. You want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah.
No, I mean, no.
Okay. All right. So we'll get you out on this. And thanks so much for your time. You guys are brilliant. I'm so proud to call you friends, and I'm so proud of what you've done. Tell us what you're working on. If there's anything you want to share about what you're working on next, any projects you want people to know about, how to follow up. If there's anything, I know everyone's always looking for projects or fundraisers or donors or whatever. And there's always this question of, is there ever going to be that Joseph Smith documentary, biography, motion picture? Do you guys have any interest on doing any more of these types of projects? Or are you guys going back to, I mean, in your case, Jared, going back to the stuff you've been doing all along? Tyler, do you have any what's next? So I just want to give you a chance.
We're doing the Shannon Flynn, Mark Hofmann sitcom is what we're doing.
The love story.
Part A-Team, part Nerdorama.
Oh man, no, Jerusha and I are busy working on an animated feature film for Netflix called The Film of the Unicorns. We're in production on that, and it's a big musical comedy. So
kind of Pixar level, right?
Yeah. I mean, CG animation, and but it's super fun. Netflix is a dream to work with. So, yep.
That came after this project?
I mean, we've been working on it for a couple of years now. I mean, the animation takes such a long time, but yeah.
Fun.
So kind of simultaneously it's been happening.
Okay.
I've got always a number of things I'm trying to get off the ground in certain areas of development. My last film before this was I Want My MTV, which Netflix is going to put on in August. It aired previously on A&E, but it's going to be on Netflix in August.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, good. It's so good.
It doesn't hurt when you have a big hit on Netflix to call them up and say, I got another movie that you could show. And they said, we'll take it. So
great.
And it was a fun film. It was so much fun making it. Really good. And I love making stories about music. So I'm considering doing one about the birth of, or the period of hair metal, if you will, or glam rock.
Yeah.
Which is a lot like Murder Among the Mormons, just more mascara.
You're talking about like Rat and Twisted Sister.
Oh yeah, the birth and death of hair metal. And I'm entertaining offers. It's been really nice. I've been I've been getting offers right now to do some pretty badass documentaries. And if something comes along that Jared and I are right for, I jump right in. We do something crazy again like that.
It's fun.
I'm doing a I've been hired by iHeart to do a podcast, to host and produce a podcast called Was I in a Cult?, which each episode tells the individual story of a person who was in and left a cult. And that's been kind of fantastic and fun. But, I'm always looking to tell some good stories. I don't want to stay too much in the Mormonism realm. People say Tyler does music, magicians, and Mormonism, and I don't want to just only do that.
It's good. It's a good combo.
But as far as the Joseph Smith story,
some people are saying the Netflix success shows a demand for. We've got NXIVM, we've got Scientology, we've got Holy Hell, and we've got Wild Wild Country, like
The Vow.
There's also some are saying that the Netflix doc, and there's already people sending me treatments, like pitches. I'm like, what do I do? Do you guys think there's more of a demand for?
No, I think
Joseph Smith.
It's funny. I think there's so much, I guess, mystery around the faith. Like it's such a weird, complex kind of dichotomy between, you've got like happy missionary, you got the Book of Mormon musical, right? that people know, like, wow, these happy-go-lucky Mormons,
right?
The Osmonds,
yeah,
like the branding of the people is just this incredibly warm,
happy, positive,
clean,
fun,
good, clean, fun people that'll bring you a huge mountain of Rice Krispies when you move into the neighborhood.
Casserole.
It's like, that's what you know. But then with that, it's like, oh, what do they do in the temple? What's the, what's Kolob? You've got, there's like the Dungeons and Dragons sci-fi world of Mormonism meets like these, like the product is like these happy, genuine, good people. And it's a mystery and it's incredibly entertaining. And I think that is, in the zeitgeist, what people are curious about. And if there's a scandal or a true crime thing or whatever about it, people are just instantly kind of entertained with the idea of what they're going to learn.
Yeah. It's good material.
It's good material. The South
years
Park
ago,
episodes are super fun. And,
apparently Robert Redford and Paul Newman were going to play Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, supposedly decades ago. And I don't know, obviously that hasn't happened. But, look, that's as far as Western expansion and good stories and interesting characters and sex and violence and corruption and greed, the story of early Mormonism and Joseph Smith and Brigham Young would make Deadwood look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, it would make a good story. And whether someone does it or not, I don't know.
There's a lot. You just kind of have to pick the point of view that you're telling it from, and which character. It's so vast, right? And if you're telling that story in 120 minutes in a film, it's like, you got to pay. There's too much.
Somewhat like a 10-part series. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You'd have to.
Like a miniseries.
Yeah, miniseries. It would be heavy duty. There's a lot of characters to follow. Yeah.
Or Roots, as it's called in Utah.
All right.
But I'm fine with the Carmelone Porter Rockwell film. That's a masterpiece.
That's enough for you.
He plays Elijah Abel as a gunslinger, which I don't know if it was super accurate, but it's a winner. We checked it out as a family home evening. Carmelone was the only one not dressed in period clothes. I feel like he had some stone-washed like Wranglers or Levi's on. He rolls up. It's a disturbing film too, because it's like Porter Rockwell is like courting, again, a very young, like teenage girl who he wants to marry. And you're like, ooh, something's off here.
And it was Carl Malone.
Anyway, Carl was the best part.
On behalf of all the people that listen to Mormon Stories podcast, Mormon people, because I can speak on behalf of the Mormon people. Just kidding.
All right.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Tyler, for making this important documentary, for telling this really important story, for just being who you are, for doing it so gracefully, so diplomatically, so professionally. I loved it, and I'm proud to call you guys friends, and you guys deserve all the success that's going to come from this, because I love you guys, and I think my listeners and viewers will agree. You guys have given us a really important gift, so thank you.
Thanks, John. It was nice to go a little deep. We've been doing a lot of interviews, and they're like, 5 minutes. You got 10 minutes for Entertainment Weekly.
That's right.
And this allows us to go a little bit deep. So thank you.
Anytime, brethren.
Thanks, John.
Anytime, brethren.
You rock.
Any final things you want to say to the audience?
Nothing. I just
You're
have
done?
a
Guess-
full bladder
go to the
again.
bathroom?
Again,
Okay.
you just went to the bathroom.
Dude, oh man,
You a pregnant woman or something?
tiny bladder.
You guys are awesome.
I'm pregnant with cinnamon rolls right now.
All right. Love you guys. Thanks, everyone. Support us at mormonstories.org if you like this kind of content. Most importantly, check out Murder Among the Mormons on Netflix. And shout out to the BBC. I had a British woman reach out to me and say, you got to mention the BBC because they wouldn't have happened without them. So
That's right. BBC
shout out
was
to the
amazing.
BBC and Netflix for making this happen. Thanks to all the listeners. Thanks to all my supporters. Please become a monthly donor on Mormon Stories podcast at mormonstories.org if you want to see this content continue. But most importantly, tell everyone about this documentary. Share it with everyone. Share this episode with everyone, everywhere, because we got to get the word out. Take care, everyone. Be good to each other. Be kind. Love you guys. Jared and Tyler, be good.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
And scene.